Good evening, everyone. Amy, come find a seat. Welcome to the second night of the RTM committee meetings on the budget. Tonight, we're going to hear from Mr. Tetreault, Mr. Mayor, and I think one more, Don.
Don Ross and Joe Michelangelo.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Don Ross.
So, Mr. Tetreault, do you want to join us?
Sorry, Don.
So put yourselves at ease. We're going to have a little synopsis of where we are to date, and then we can take questions.
Did everyone get some of the email packets that were sent out today? I don't know if we have extras here tonight, but
They're all sent to everyone.
okay.
So whether they printed them out or got them in time, I don't know.
I'm going to my goal is to kind of position where we are. There's been a lot of changes to the budget in the last 72 hours, and just want to catch everybody up. From the top, the first question is kind of where are we? It's been quite a journey here for the last few months. We have endeavored to, at each point in the process, use the latest available information. The information, as you've seen, as you followed along, has been in flux quite a bit. But we've got some major adjustments that have been made in the last couple weeks, and then some adjustments specifically to departments and line items over the last 72 hours. So from the top, we're now at a budget of $279,778,811, or approximately a 2.91% tax increase. When you break that down in a couple different segments, the town operations are up 0.35%, or approximately $299,000. Just if you're following along on some of the handouts, the numbers I'm quoting from can be found on the budget control schedule on the last page 4 of that document.
Does anyone need copies made?
So the town operations are up 0.35%. The Board of Ed is currently sitting at an increase of 1.85%. Because that's a small percentage, but it is a big number, big base, that does lead to a $2.76 million increase. Retiree benefits are up 27.38%, or about $3.3 million. And debt service is up 4.57%, or $1.2 million. And again, part of our process here is we put the budget together with the best available information. The numbers we used initially were based on December and January information. We've had some major positive improvements in healthcare costs, in the bid results that finally came in on our healthcare providers, and improved collection rates. In addition, over the last 72 hours, between the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance, we've had some key adjustments. To the Board of Ed, $1.25 million. To paving, a reduction of $500,000, which brings it down to $3 million for the year. And our surplus contribution, and this is our contribution back into savings, or what we call our surplus, or our rainy day fund, and we've reduced that contribution for the year by $250,000, but the remaining contribution is still $675,000, or approximately 5% of what our current budget is. We've talked a lot about the drivers over the last year, and they're still with us. But much has changed. We've got the Board of Ed, as I mentioned, is our #1 driver, but that's up less than 2% now. There are 4 other drivers that are really tied into our labor dollars and contract situation, salaries, health insurance, pension, and retiree medical. We've seen significant improvements in these areas in recent contracts. And just to catch everybody up, starting July 1st, we'll have at least 5 more contracts to be renegotiated. We have 2 that still remain to be resolved for this year. Our town employees have been dedicated during the past year, especially during storms events that we've all acknowledged. They understand the economy has changed, and they're working with us to make adjustments. I do want to point out that in this budget, pension and OPEB are fully funded. You know, it's as we read news reports over the next few weeks, we'll see a lot of tax feedback information and tax increases coming in from other towns. And I just want to make sure whenever we do those comparisons, we're doing apples to apples. There are a number of towns around that do not have a fully funded pension, aren't fully funding their ARCs for pension or OPEB, and we are. We are not kicking the can down the road. We're making sure we're meeting our short-term obligations and our long-term obligations as part of this budget. So we've got the Board of Ed as one driver. We've got our kind of cost of labor as a second big driver in those 4 categories. Third area is debt service, and there's no surprise there. That's all about how much we bond. And simply put, going forward, as those of you who sat through the capital planning workshop realize, that we have a plan laid out in terms of what we need to do, but there's no magic. If we're going to drop this number down, we need to bond less, we need to build smaller, and build less. Next up in categories of drivers is 2 areas that are really, we are accounting for past decisions we've made. One is our contribution to paving. We had been bonding that for a considerable period of time. We decided a few years ago that we were going to make that adjustment and stop bonding annual road maintenance or annual paving and move that over to the operating budget. We'd committed to do that over 3 years. And looking at this budget and looking at the economy, that 3-year plan may have been a bit aggressive, and what's included in this budget is an adjustment on that. Not a reversal from making that commitment and moving the paving over into operations, but just realizing that $1 million a year was an aggressive target when we identified that 3 years ago. That may have been a bit too much, so we did an adjustment in this budget and lowered that by $500,000. We still want to move it to operating. Doing it out of the operating budget is the least expensive in the long term because we're only paying for the paving. We're not paying for the paving plus interest on the paving. The other component of what I'll call past decisions is our contribution to surplus. The amount of money we have in our unassigned fund balance or surplus or savings account is something that the AAA rating is based on. It's one of the key components that the credit rating agencies look at. It's one of the reasons our improvements in that are one of the reasons that our negative outlook was lifted this past spring. We're at about 5%. If you go back a few years, we're up at 9%. That's important because a typical AAA town is in that 9 to 10% range. We actually dropped it down by using our surplus to fund operations. We dropped it down in a 3% range. And over the last few years, we've built it back up to 5%. We're in a situation where in one of the toughest economies, when we're trying to minimize our tax rate, run our town as tight as we can, unlike many towns around here that are using their surplus to fund operations, we're in a position of having to put money back into our surplus. So one of the other things you do when I reached out to other first selectmen, other mayors in surrounding towns and talked about their tax increases, what they were doing and how they achieved it, the vast majority said they were using their surplus to fund operations. The vast majority said they were deficit budgeting. They were spending more than they were bringing in current year revenues. We stopped that practice several years ago. We haven't built up our surplus enough to be able to use it to do that in the current year when it might be nice to do that. If we had a 10% surplus, which is one of the target levels for some of the AAA towns, and some of the non-AAA towns are up in that range too, we'd have $27 million. If we had $27 million in surplus, we could take $1 million or $2 million of that and apply it to our operations this year and use that to keep our tax increase down. We're not in that situation. I guess the other comparison point I'd like to make is our budget, as much as our tax increase is up 2.91%, our expenditure budget is only up 2.75%. We're moved up to the 2.9% rate due to our expanded senior tax relief program. By expanding our senior tax relief program, what we did is it doesn't increase expenditures, it does lower our revenue. So in essence, we have to have a higher mill rate to reach the same revenue target. Again, if we had just continued with the same tax relief program, that was costing us about $3.2 million each year. All right. What's in this budget, because of the expanded income levels and expanded payouts, is an allowance for $4.5 million. That's $1.2 to $1.3 million over what our run rate was. That's a significant jump. When you add that in with our paving contribution and our surplus, those two combined are $1.1 million. We are meeting our long-term obligations, which, as I mentioned, is not true for every town. So if we didn't have that expansion in senior tax relief, if we weren't still putting money into our surplus to catch up with where we were, if we weren't still moving paving over to our operating budget, and you looked at what our increase would be, that would equate to a 1.97% increase. So I'm not questioning any of those decisions. But if we're comparing to other towns, we just want an apples-to-apples comparison. So that's it for kind of an intro and a catch-up as to where we are. If there were any questions, I'll be happy to take those.
Mr. First Selectman, just out of curiosity, we had talked, briefly, and I think you've mentioned this, in some of the other meetings, that there's still a potential for our trends in the healthcare to change, and it seems to be at the end of each month. More recently, you've been able to come and say the experiential data is showing that we might not need to put as much aside for healthcare, and it's really responsible for a lot of the adjustments that, or a good chunk of the adjustments that were made. What do we anticipate April to look like? Do we anticipate a similar type of big change? Is that change going to be are the fluctuations going to be much smaller than we've seen the last month? Maybe you can just give us a little background on that.
Okay. Let's take, there are really, I'm going to say, four components or four elements that you're asking about. Let's take the town side first. There's the experience component, and that's one of the adjustments we made at the Board of Selectmen meeting based on our experience through the end of February. And then there's the bid results based on, we went out to bid on providers, kind of the decrease we saw in cost due to the change in providers or the new provider rates. So from the town side, we've pretty much made the decision as to what provider we're going with. So what's in the budget now, we don't expect to change. On the experience side, we'll have the results through the end of March in another week or so. Mr. Mayor, do you know when we expect that? Sometime after the middle of the month. As soon as we have that and have a chance to evaluate that, we will make that information available to this body. It's the same results we got, as you pointed out, towards the end of March, and we're able to include in the Board of Selectmen vote at that time. Same issue on the Board of Ed side, same two components. What's their experience number? Now, the Board of Ed spends about twice as much on health insurance as the town, so that experience factor has been a little bit bigger over time. They are currently evaluating. They also have their bid results back on the provider side. They are currently evaluating that. As we may have talked, it's not the same as buying a tractor and you go out and, this tractor's $500,000, that tractor's $400,000, I'll take the $400,000 tractor because it does the same thing and it's cheaper. As much as we're bidding the same plan, the evaluation of the cost savings is considerably softer, and it comes with one of those plus or minus 5% factors on the total healthcare expense. So it takes a little bit more time to evaluate that. So over the next 2 weeks, I believe the Board of Ed should have completed their evaluation, certainly in time for the May vote, possibly in time for the April vote, for them to get that information back here too, to see if there's any additional savings. So you will have their recommendation and any achievable savings before you do your final vote.
Okay, so the Board of Ed, on the Board of Ed bid, that hasn't been factored in here at all? Any type of, let's say there was any type of savings, hasn't been factored into this at all?
Both the town and the Board of Ed cost savings due to the new bids on healthcare providers are in here based on staying with the same provider.
Okay.
All right, for the town, there's no cost difference, so it makes sense to stay with the same provider. There is minimum exposure if we do that. If we were to change, when there's not much of a savings to be made, you risk both potential grievance situations in terms of the bargaining units not being happy with the change, as well as, again, the fuzziness of the numbers from a new provider. With your current provider, you kind of know they went to those doctors, they went to those providers, that's what it is. With a new provider, they're making assumptions about which provider or doctor or medical service person somebody would go to.
Okay.
And you just have no way of being sure that their assumption is right. That's why the wide swing in terms of or what I'm calling the softness of the numbers in that regard.
Okay.
On the Board of Ed side, there may be some savings if they switch providers. All right. If they do that, then they're really taking time to dot I's and cross T's and make sure there's a real savings there and not just a perceived savings.
Okay.
It's kind of like those polls that come out and say that it's 42-40, but with a plus or minus rating of 3% or 3 points, and you say, okay, that's even though it looks like a savings, it may not be. That's kind of where we are. And I don't mean to knock the alternative vendors that are providing their numbers. What they're doing is the industry norm. So this type of analysis, according to our Aon insurance consultants, is what everybody goes through. So it's just not a rock-hard number, so you have to make sure the savings are significant enough to make the switch.
Okay. But really, so back to the experiential data, is there anything that we can kind of assume about where that might come out in mid-April? In the more favorable side or let's say on the negative side?
Yeah, not that I have, but let me check. Mr. Mayor? Can we make any assumptions about where the experience data is trending, or do we need to leave it where it is? And if you're going to answer that significantly, do you want to come up and use the mic?
Mary, Mr. Palmer, members of the RTM. Health insurance experience varies, I'm sure, everywhere month to month. The Board of Ed this year started out with very poor experience. When we looked at that early in the year, we anticipated that it would probably drop, and it has. But what you want to do in this situation is take your latest and best numbers. That's what's available. That's what we have. That's what reserves are for, because there will be some variance from what your best estimate is. The Board of Ed, as you all know probably, had very favorable trends for a long period of time. But healthcare experience, like everything else in the world, towards to regress to the mean. And that's kind of what's happened to them this year. Each month of experience gives you new data. As Mr. Tetreault mentioned earlier, we will, around the middle of this month, have the March information. We will revise the numbers at that time. And the estimate could go up, it could go down, but there's really no way of telling.
So if the numbers go, let's say the numbers go down, for selectmen, will you be making a recommendation? Will you be able to be in a position to make a recommendation to us that we might be able to, make a reduction to those.
That would be the plan. The same approach we took at the Board of Selectmen meeting, same approach we took back when we put together the budget, and I made a reduction to the Board of Ed numbers based on their experience at that time. We'd give the same recommendation here in terms of what we would propose. The RTM is welcome to, use that or not use that as you wish.
Okay. So we'll mark our calendars then.
Right after you fill out your
Right.
income tax returns, yes.
Representative Marmion?
Can you just review for us with the Madoff settlement what the status of that is and when we would expect that money and where we would put that money if you've accounted for it in the budget? We'd make an adjustment for it? How's that going to work?
Those funds, like the other settlements we've gotten at this point, don't directly impact the budget. They indirectly impact it. So any of that money we get back would go directly into the pension fund,
Okay.
which is what it came out of. Most specifically, just to address that, and thank you for asking, the most recent settlement we won't see for a couple years. It is contingent on the Maxim account getting their settlement from the Picard trustee. Our attorney recommended, A, that was reasonable that they would. We're first in line to get that. When that happens, sometimes over the next 2 years, that money would go right into the pension fund. The other simple reality is that there's no other money that Maxim has. We've spent the last couple years tracking them down. We've deposed everybody. We've looked for it. We look for money in this country. We look for money in offshore accounts. And they just don't have any other money. So that's what we're waiting on.
Representative Lee?
Mr. Tetro, since we were on the health insurance question, the Internal Service Fund, last year we made a pretty substantial contribution to that. Are we in a position where we don't have to do that this year? And if our experience did drop, do we maybe want to leave a little bit in there? Because it was my recollection that it wasn't that robust last time we looked.
We have, let's talk about the Internal Service Fund. There are 3 components of the Internal Service Fund. One is that the town medical insurance and its reserve. The other is the Board of Ed medical insurance and its reserve. And the third is what we call our general liability. That includes both workers' comp and our legal liability. The types of cases that are in that, for lack of a better term, are the slips and falls. Anybody where the town is suing us, we would put a reserve in that. The overall fund is negative. We put in $2 million last year to address not the town health insurance side or the Board of Ed health insurance side, but to address our workers' comp, part of our general liability piece, and increase the funding for that. We started out with $1 million, actually increased that to $2 million during the budget process last year based on the trends. And fortunately we did, because that let us pretty much tread water and stay even. This past year, the Board of Ed medical experience has been a little bit on the negative side, and so their reserve is down a bit. The town medical experience has been on the positive side, so the town reserve has gone up a bit, and we've kept the general liability or workers' comp number even. What we've done as part of our workers' comp program is put in safety programs, safety committees rather, throughout the town and Board of Ed. We've done additional training. We have regular meetings on the safety side. We have started to see a trend that's more positive on the workers' comp side. It is not significant enough has not extended long enough that we are adjusting our workers' comp numbers yet, but we're looking to do that next year, that we can start. They've started to pretty much stabilize now. We'd like to see them trend back down to the levels they've been at historically. All right. With the medical side, we are funding the Aon recommended amounts. And on the workers' comp side, just to be clear, we're working with a consultant by the name of PMA, and we fund the amounts that they recommend on that side. So we are going with the recommended amounts in each case. Historically, that's kept us in good stead.
So, so in other words, we're stable. We're not living in clover, but we're not on the edge as we were
Correct.
before.
And
Okay.
where that, the rating agencies really look at that fund as looks at the total of all three of those. They don't break those out individually as much as we present them to them individually. The second thing, and the key points we made last year in our presentations were, one, that our surplus number had come way up from the 3% when they had dinged us with a negative outlook up to 5%, and that was a significant dollar amount, being in the $15 million range. So that our negative accrual or negative liability in the internal service fund was something that wasn't a current liability, that's something we owe over 20 to 30 years. So it's much like a pension fund obligation where you're funding that over 20 to 30 years. And we pointed out to them that our pension fund was 100% funded. So when you balance those out, that's not all bad. And we pointed out to them that there were other AAA towns that while they might have had a good internal service fund, and ours is like negative $5 million or something, that they didn't have $300 million put away in their pension fund, and they were actually down $100 million. And it made a lot more sense to be negative $5 million than negative $100 million, and they shouldn't penalize us for that. And while they didn't acknowledge it at the meeting, they did remove our negative outlook, so we think they heard us.
Representative Ryan?
Good evening, Mr. Tetro. I would like to follow up on Sheila's Marmion's question on the pension. You said that somewhere maybe in the next 2 years we might see some recovery from Maxim, correct?
Of the 2.8, yes, correct.
Of the $2.8 million. And you've stated that our pension fund is at present, with this $6.5 million addition to it this year, or proposed, that it's 100% funded. Is that correct?
I believe the total contribution to the pension plan for this year is closer to $8.7 or $8.8 million. There are 4 buckets that pension contribution comes from. One is the town side, which is the one you most likely see, and that's in the drivers.
Right.
There's one on the Board of Ed side for the non-certified employees. There's a smaller one in the WPCA budget.
Okay.
And there's a smaller one in the food service budget on the Board of Ed side.
All right, so roughly 8 some odd million this year as a contribution.
Correct.
Now, if, for example, I heard this, now I don't know if this is true or not, but we're somewhat near first in line. Should Maxim recover money from Picard's trust on Madoff? Is that correct?
Correct.
They're in for a claim something like $110 million. Does that sound?
That's my recollection, but I'm not.
Okay.
I don't have that in front of me.
Well, the reason I'm asking this is because the pension contribution is such a large number, and you've just demonstrated how it helps us with a rating that we are fully funded relative to other people. It's not something that is an immediate need for money if you were at 98% funded or 90. In fact, I don't know what the numbers of other towns are. You've alluded to that, but
most of the AAA towns are around 100%. Some of the other towns, like a Trumbull, the one AAA town that's not at 100%, 2 that I know of, one is West Hartford, and the other is Westport.
Okay. I just question if there isn't room in the event that we need to find money, because there is some likelihood that there will be in my opinion, that Maxim will receive money from Picard, and that if we're first in line, there's $2 million plus there that'll come in our direction, which is, if it came today, we would be more than 100% funded. So we don't need to be more than 100% funded at a time when the taxpayer is paying 3 and 4%, if you will. I know we're down to about 3% now, but if we were trying to get to 2%, I think it would require about a $2 million reduction in something. And would the pension be a place that we should be considering? I guess is where I'm going with this.
Yeah, you want to run for governor of Connecticut? Because that's how we got in this mess.
Mike, I'm with you. I'm not.
And Mr. Ryan, forgive me, I was
No,
being
I hear
facetious,
you.
and you've been very kind in terms of stepping through that. Just so we're clear, there isn't a legal requirement to fully fund the pension. Right? As you look around at other towns and states around the country, quite simply, that's how they got into the mess. If you look at why, West Hartford has a 60% funded pension, all right, that's it. there are a number of assumptions that you make when you're doing a pension. One of our assumptions is that we're going to get 7.5% return on our money. Last year, we got less than 1%. Currently, we're running about 9%. Any one year, that can fluctuate. That's an estimate for over 30 years is what we're going to get. I mentioned that Westport's not 100% funded. One of the reasons is they're assuming about a 6.5% return. You lower that return, you lower your funding level, and you raise what you're required to put in as an ARC. At 7.5%, we're kind of around the median level, but just so everybody's clear, those numbers for most towns are trending down. Nobody's sitting there raising those discount rates. They tend to lower those discount rates over town. We just recently lowered ours from 8 to 7.75 to 7.5. And if you took the temperature of the pension board, I doubt if you'd find anybody who'd want to raise it from 7.5. We'd probably try and look at lowering it from this point on. So that's what I would expect to happen the next time we do a formal review. So as much as we're either fully funded or close to that, when you look at the trends, one of the trends is our pension fund is going to drop down to about, over the next 2 or 3 years, 89 to 90% funding, and then it's going to start trending up after that. Those are the, if you look in the, Mr. Steele, we gave out a book from the actuaries, and I'm not sure if that got distributed out to all the RTM members or not. We can certainly do that. For those of you that, I'm referencing the book that would have had the 5-year trends in it. Does anybody, did we get that out to you?
Yeah.
All right. If not, we certainly can. If you do have it, please take a look, and you can see, even though we're fully funding our ARC, even though we're fully funding the actuarial recommended amount, the amount of our funding is going to go down based on other assumptions that are being made, and then it'll start to trend back up. And we can certainly provide, either with Mr. Mayor or with the actuaries, to step you through a better definition or more background as to exactly why that happens. But I would be very cautious about not funding the pension. And here's the other, the math side of this. We're West Hartford. We're 60% funded. We've got a discount rate of 7.5%, say like Fairfield. I'm not quite sure what theirs is, by the way. Let's say they make 7.5%. They made 7.5% on 60% of the money. That's not the same as making 7.5% on $300 million. So every dollar we're less than $300 million, we actually have to earn better than our discount rate to meet what our discount rate is telling us we need to be at. So my caution would be that when I was on the Board of Finance, when we started having to put money back into the pension fund, we've gone through 4 or 5 very tough years. And I think as Mr. Chairman Flynn of the Board of Finance was quoted the other night, there is no easy budget year. I'm not hearing anybody project the economy is going to get any better anytime soon. So if we were to reach into that pocket now to take some of that savings out, we might find ourselves next year in the same situation, reaching into that pocket again. So I'm not telling you you can't do it. I'm not telling you it's illegal. I'm telling you fiscally, I'm not sure that would be the most responsible move. One, I think the key things that distinguish Fairfield over time is that we've met our long-term obligations. And that's what we're trying to return our town to, and making sure we're funding all of our obligations. So when we get a tax decrease, when we get a low tax increase, there are no games. It's a really low tax increase. And that's what we're trying to do, and run the town as efficiently as possible in order to meet that goal.
Thank you, Mr. Tetreault.
Mr. Becker, then Stamler, Patton.
So, regarding the pension and kind of following up with Mr. Ryan there, if we were to get the 2.8 million from Maxim right now,
Yes.
it's my understanding that that would not just immediately apply, for instance, to our ARC. It would be
Correct.
phased in over, I believe it's
10 years.
10 years now, so even more of a phase. And so similarly, it helped us on the way in, obviously, or the way down with some of the market and everything. It's got to happen the same way. I'm correct about that? And actually, thank you, it's 10 years now.
Yeah, Mr. Becker, good point. And just to describe, if, I'm going to pick on you, Mr. Ryan. Mr. Ryan won lottery tomorrow and said, I really think this is important. I'm going to put $20 million into the town pension fund because I'm so worried about it. And he gave us $20 million cash tomorrow. It would not change the arc for this year one penny. All right, the arc for this year is based on the balance in the pension fund last July 1st. All right, now the 20 million would impact us on July 1st, 2013, and would lower the arc for fiscal year 15. All right, but it wouldn't impact this year's arc. To Mr. Becker's other point, last year, we overfunded our pension. The actuarial recommended amount, and I'm going to use some approximate numbers here, so please, if they're not quite right, forgive me. I believe the actuary said use about $4.5 million. The Board of Finance was concerned about that and said, we want to put in more than that. We don't want to lower the pension contribution year to year. We want to make sure we stay level. So there's approximately $800,000 additional that they put in last year. So we tax people $800,000 more than the actuary recommended. The benefit in this year, as Mr. Becker pointed out, and for each of the next 10 years, is an $80,000 reduction in our pension payment. So this year, we're paying $80,000 less for our pension contribution because we put in $800,000 last year. Now, putting more money in the pension fund is never the wrong thing. I don't mean to be critical of that. But in terms of year-to-year tax benefit, we paid $800,000 more in taxes last year to pay $80,000 less this year. Is that?
Yeah, no, that clarified. I mean, I just want to make sure that everyone sort of understood that, because I think there's some complexities in the actuarial component there, where it's not like you just get the money and drop it in and help. I mean, it's a difficult thing to balance out.
Point well taken. The actuaries kind of live in an alternate universe, and the numbers that we would normally think just don't work that way.
Thank you.
Representative Stamler?
Two questions.
Could I just ask you to use the mic? Thank you.
Thank you. Two questions. I think debt service is probably an area I know almost least about. When we have a payment on a bond, and we get that rate when we issue the bond, does that remain fixed for the life of the bond, or does it vary from year to year?
No and yes. Let me ask Mr. Mayor to come up to provide a little bit more detail on that. But no, it is not fixed for the life of the bond, and yes, it does vary, perhaps not year to year, but if we sell $40 million in bonds, they're sold in what's called tranches, and each tranche is a little bit different. And Mr. Mayor, if I could ask you to come up and elaborate on that a little further.
Yeah, that's actually one of the agenda items tonight, so why don't I just do that agenda item right now? It won't take long at all, actually. When we basically sell bonds, which are debt instruments that are greater than 5 years, and then we sell bands, which are bond anticipation notes, which are less than 5 years. Each of those instruments comes with a bond resolution that defines the maximum amount of time that it defines the amount of time over which the principal must be repaid. When that bond goes out to market, there's actually a schedule that's put together as to what when it's sold, as to what the principal payments will be and what the interest payments will be over the life of that instrument. So once it's sold, you're locked in. It's and the rates could change. The earlier tranches on our bonds today might be a first year or two. You might have zero interest or very low interest. Years 3 to 5 or 3 through 7, you might be paying 1.5%, 2%, and years for a 20-year bond in years 15 through 20, you might be paying 4%. When you read in the newspaper that a given municipality sold a bond at 2.2%, that is the present value of the entire stream of payments over that principal amount. Was that semi-clear?
When you say we're locked in, Are
It is, you're locked in, you are committed to that schedule. You cannot change that schedule.
what we're locked into is a certain rate in each of years
You're
1,
locked
2, 3,
into
4,
a-
5, 6, 7.
You're locked into a schedule of principal and interest payments for the entire life of the ban or the bond,
And we-
of the bond.
And we know that rate now.
Yes,
Okay, that's my, thank you.
yeah. So the number that's in the budget for fiscal year 14 is based upon the accumulation of the payments of the schedules of all the outstanding issues. And we're legally obligated to make, contractually obligated to make those payments this year, or in that fiscal year.
May I just add to my question? So in other words, when someone says this is a good time to borrow money, that will remain true for the money we borrow now throughout the life of that debt?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. My other question is about health insurance, so I can wait if you want.
Go right ahead. I wanted to make sure, though, that Representative Patton, you had a question?
I did. I'm
I-
asking a
I don't know if,
our math,
if,
our
if,
math whiz here.
I don't know if Mr. Mayor wants to continue with his presentation on, or take questions. It's up to you.
We can follow up on the bonds or the debt if you want, or I can...
Why don't you ask you, why don't you go
Okay,
ahead with
on the health
healthcare?
insurance. If I have my numbers right, from the first budget presentation to today, the total amount of the budget has dropped by about $7.5 million, if I'm looking at the numbers right. From 287 something to 279 something, roughly. Of that, it seems to me, if I don't have all the pieces in front of me, but almost half of that, or about $3 million, is a reduction in the Board of Education's cost for health insurance and in its experience-related cost.
Correct.
Okay. That change occurred over a period of 2 months, basically, right? The first numbers were based
Well-
on December. Is it more than
No,
that?
the initial, there's a couple of components, I think Mr. Tetro addressed that a little bit earlier. There's a couple of components to that change. The initial Board of Ed healthcare estimate was based upon their experience through November only.
Through November, okay, so it,
When the first Selectman budget recommendation came out, there was an adjustment to that, 1.1 million, which was based upon information through December. The current estimate that's in there is based upon information through February.
so over 3 months, it dropped about $3 million.
No, that component is about 2.3 or maybe 2.4. And then the second component is a result of the success of the bid process. The current carrier, a carrier can't, since we're self-funded, and even if we weren't self-funded, a carrier is not going to reduce the anticipated claims experience, because that's money out of pocket for either the insurer or the self-insurer. But what they can adjust is the administrative fee. And so
yeah, thank you.
Anthem reduced their administrative fee for both the town and the Board of Ed, and that's the remainder of the adjustment amount.
All right, so thank you for helping me to understand that. My question is, when we're voting on the budget, we will have one additional month's experience,
Correct.
March. Over 3 months, there was a $2.5 million change in the experience. In 1 month, there could be an improvement, it could get worse by a significant amount. If it gets worse, what happens to our budget? What impact does it have?
Minor correction has been 4 months, because it's November through March, it's 4 months difference. December, January, February, March. Excuse me.
The change was December, January, February. We
Thank
don't
you.
have March yet.
Correct, don't have March yet. Will be 4 months. That's what reserves are for. The budgeted amount includes for both the town and the Board of Ed, that there would be what is called 100% of a reasonable reserve amount,
The IBNR?
the IBNR, called incurred, not be reported. And that is in the Board of Ed at a full 100%, and I'm not sure what it is in the town, but it's a little bit greater than 100%, I think, possibly.
I guess what I'm getting at is if there's an improvement and we feel that because there's an improvement in experience, we can possibly reduce the budget increase.
Correct.
Say it's $500,000 improvement. If it's negative the other way, we just draw on the reserve, or do we increase our budget?
Well, you can't, I mean, the RTM can't
Can't
increase
increase
the
the
budget.
budget, so-
So it would have to be a utilization of the reserve or an adjustment to operational expenses.
I guess what I'm getting at is, and you can't answer this, I guess I'll have to think about it, is the wisdom of reducing the budget based on a one-month improvement if in the next month it could go the other way? That's the question I'm thinking about.
Well,
Yeah, I think that your point's well taken, and I think we can provide you the information. We'll give you as much around that as we can. But this is a situation we're in every single spring.
Right, I know that. That's why I'm asking the
If
question.
you want to get really scared, realize that we're betting on what the state's going to do or not do in terms of state aid, and they'll vote on that in June. So that, you know, that's a challenge all the way through. So at some point, that's why the emphasis on, we're using the best available information. We want to make sure you know what it is at that point. The reserves we're using are those recommended by the our Aon insurance actuaries, so that we're not, we're using their recommended amounts at that point. So we're doing everything that's reasonable in that regard.
Thank you.
Representative Patton?
Hi. You mentioned earlier about the senior tax relief program and the estimates that we had given you with the $1.4 million reduction in revenue. Is how that works? Is that I'm sorry, 1.2. You're,
Yes,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
Okay. So my question is, it's about a month until the filing deadline. Do we have any information from the tax assessor to say, are we on track for what we've paid out in past years? Not paid out, but for the amount of people who've signed up so far from past years? Are we ahead, or do we have any information on that whatsoever to see?
Yes,
how
and we don't have a good comparison because they haven't tracked that day-to-day type of thing, so I can't say, as, you know, 100 days into our sign-up period, we're running this much ahead or behind the sign-ups. Last time I checked, there were between 400 and 500 sign-ups, which I thought was kind of low at the time. Don Ross, our tax assessor, informed me that most of the sign-ups really come in after April 15th. I'm not quite sure what drives that. One of the thoughts is to make sure that we go out and do some more publicity as part of that.
Okay. So we don't know. So obviously, we're not going to have any good information to see where we are before we vote on.
Again, happy to get you an update so that you have whatever the latest information is. It just, I was surprised that we didn't have more signups faster. I thought we'd gotten a lot of, I thought that the senior tax relief program was significantly improved. I thought it was open to a lot more people. I thought that with all the publicity it got, there'd be a lot more early signups with folks taking part of that. I think it points out to me that we have a lot more publicity to do and kind of get that out and make sure that we're providing a tremendous benefit for folks, and we want to make sure they take advantage of it.
Representative Hopkins.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Tetreault. I heard you before, you were talking about that we have both a savings account, and I also know we have a contingency account. Are they two separate accounts?
Yes.
Is that a requirement by the bonding agencies or something? Because it seems duplicative.
They're different timeframes. And at least let me explain what I mean by those two, and perhaps in your mind they might be different, but let me give you my definitions. When we talk contingency and we refer to, let's take the driver's sheet and there's a number there for contingency, that's in essence a line item in the current year budget. At the end of this year's budget, we add up the expenses, add up the revenues, whatever's left potentially is contingency, and if we don't use it for any overages, we would drop that into our surplus, the equivalent in a private sector company of retained earnings. All right, the surplus is more of a balance sheet account or a fund balance. It's referred to as the general fund balance, the unassigned fund balance, but it's a balance sheet account. It's what's left over from a cumulative surpluses of all the individual years. So in any one year, we put in a contingency for expenses we anticipate. We just don't know that when they're going to come or just how much they'll be. At the end of the year, we know what all the expenses were. Whatever's left becomes our annual surplus, and that gets folded into our general fund balance.
Okay. I also have a question about real estate conveyance taxes on the revenue sheets. I didn't see that broken out. Do you have any idea or sense of how we're doing on real estate conveyance taxes as far as revenue?
In the budget or in the...
We got this email today of all revenue by source. I thought that that was telling us where revenue's coming in so far.
You all should have gotten several, one comment on the senior tax relief. One of the requirements when people apply for the senior tax relief is that they have their tax returns completed. So, and your W-2s and for people retired, your R-1099s, those things, they don't have them until February. So your earliest sign-ups are going to be in February, and most people complete their taxes in March and April. So that's why you get the bulk of the items after April.
Okay.
And, yeah, you want to...
If you look in your packet of handouts, there's the cover sheet says executive summary, all revenue by source.
Yes.
1, 2, 3. If you look on page 4, there's a page entitled Service Charges, right after state grants.
Okay.
And there's Town Clerk Conveyance. Shows the budget for fiscal 13, the budget for fiscal 14, and the difference.
Well, I'm seeing 42,312. Okay, town conveyance tax. Okay. All right. That does explain that. All right.
And I believe last time that Betsy Brown, our town clerk, was asked, we were on track to exceed that number, not by a tremendous amount, but to exceed it.
All right, so it's pretty much compared to what flat compared to what it was last year, or pretty close?
Yeah, conveyance tax, when we talk about, non-tax revenue being down, one of the big sources of non-tax revenue has historically been conveyance tax. When you go back to the good years, that number was $2.5 million. In the very depths of the real estate depression, recently, maybe in the $900,000 to $1 million range. So this is part of the comeback, but we're only projecting it up $25,000 year to year. We're thankful that it's flat at the moment and hoping we continue to trend up.
Okay. The only other thing I have to say is that actuarial sheet by, I think it was Hooker and Holcomb on the pensions. If it was sent out before, I think it would be helpful to all the members if we had it again, because there seem to be a lot of questions about the pensions and where they're going. So I think it would be helpful if that was sent out again so people could see it before we vote on the budget.
Okay. Linda, can you make sure that's on our follow-up list?
Thank you.
Representative Abercrombie.
I have a question about the contingency line. Oh, I'm sorry. I noticed in the budget book that for fiscal years 10, 11, and 12, there was 0 budgeted for contingency. And it went to 238.5 in fiscal year 13, and now I think you said it was reduced, but on this line item at the time, it was about 2.56. And my question is, what accounts for the significant leap?
Okay, well, when you're looking at the prior years, let me point out that you're looking at actuals, if you look at the top of the page. And at the end of the year, the contingency account is cleaned out, so there is no actual for the contingency at the end of the year. So in order to find out what was budgeted for those years, you'd actually have to go back to the approved budget books for those years.
So that doesn't reflect what was budgeted, it reflects the year-end
Correct.
number.
All right, now for those years, there would probably be less budgeted than we have the last 2 years. All right, for the last 2 years, what's been in our contingency account is both a certain amount for contingency, genuinely unknown expenses, and a certain amount for contract settlements with our bargaining units or labor unions.
And can you give us any idea about how that 2 point, again, I'm using the number from the original budget, 2.559 was determined, and whether or not it would be susceptible to some form of reduction?
I would suggest there are two things. No, I would not suggest that you do that. We determined it by looking at what we anticipated as a reasonable allowance for bargaining unit settlements and a reasonable allowance for contingency.
Thanks.
Representative Ryan?
Mr. Tetro, can you give us a status of last year's outstanding lawsuits from tax increases? I think there was something like 177 suits that were filed against the town.
Oh, I'm sorry. You okay, you mean
Real estate-
assessment appeals?
Yeah.
I'm
real
sorry.
estate- I'm sorry.
Yes, I think, and again, I'm going to use approximate numbers. I can get you exact numbers. Just off the top of my head, I'm not going to.
I know
we
you're
had
going to
100
give me the right stuff.
We had
Just-
190, I think, in total over the first 2 years. We've settled over 100 of those. The ones that are left are, for the most part, made up of some of the commercial suits. Those take a little bit longer, commercial appeals. There's a little bit more work involved compared to the typical residential appeal.
And the costs related to that have been, from a legal standpoint, you have any idea what that number is?
Not off the top of my head. We can certainly provide that. We've provided that in other analyses, so we can get that to you, certainly.
And are there, and just as a third part of that whole thing, is there a number in the top of your head you give me for delinquent taxes that, that are just not being paid?
Not off the top of my head. I'm sorry. We do have that analysis. We've looked at that. That was one of the reasons we looked at doing a tax sale a year ago, because we saw that number trending up, and we wanted to put a stop to that.
Right.
The tax sale worked not only for those that were delinquent, but it actually worked for those that weren't delinquent because it got so much publicity.
Okay.
So and just to be clear, Mr. Ryan, if you would, Linda, did you capture those? I just want to make sure we're getting your follow. I'm not taking the notes here. I just want to make sure we're following up, so I'm not telling you we will and then not deliver them to you.
That'd be fine. I'm sure she will follow up.
Okay.
Just one other question. Representative Stamler was, I think, asking some questions about bonding and the cost of bonding. And being that we're in a historically low interest rate environment, which no one knows whether we're going to go skyrocketing or go into a more deflationary spiral, if you will, there's an assumption, and I didn't realize this because I wasn't in the town political spectrum until last year. This paving that you mentioned earlier was taken out of a capital budget where it was bonded and put into an operating budget. And it looks like there's $2.5 million that was put out in 13. It's you're asking for it to be $3.5 million. I guess 500 has already been cut by the Board of Finance. What was the original number? There was a 3-year plan or a 5-year plan that we were going to spend on paving and put it in the operating budget. Was it like $15 million or something?
Let me step you back through the history and
Let me just, I don't want to make a big deal of this, except that there's an issue that, we take today's dollars and we put them in with the assumption that our asset managers are going to earn 7.5% to fund the pension plan. So we need to put that money in. But in the meantime, Mr. Mayor has pointed out that we could go out and borrow money today at an average rate of, say, 2% over a 20-year period.
2.5% was our latest bonding.
Okay.
Yes.
So there's a nice arbitrage that could be done for the town, in the town's benefit there. If I could do this, I would borrow $100 million, put it in the pension fund, and earn the 5% different for the town. All right, you know, and I'm not meaning that jokingly, but I'm just to illustrate a point.
I think there may be some legal issues with that approach.
I know there is.
Though I do applaud your creativity.
Yeah. Well, we're all trying to be creative here to get to a lesser tax rate for the taxpayer, right?
Yeah, I mean, basically, we are not allowed to arbitrage our debt. It's against the IRS rules. Otherwise, we would lose our tax exemption status.
Well, being creative again, if I took the money and I bonded paving, and just like I didn't expend all the money from what I understand last year, who's to say what pocket the money gets put in?
Let's, when we talk about this paving, if we were basically building a new neighborhood, we're putting in a whole series of new streets that had never been done before, I would argue that we should pave it, or should bond that. Because those roads should last 20 years, that makes sense, it's all new.
Right.
Here's what we're talking about. This is annual road maintenance. We have 270 miles of roads in Fairfield. Divide that by 20, you come up with 13.5 miles of roads. That's what our DPW department tries to pave every year. So what we were previously doing is, one, paving inconsistently and not having the same amount, not having a plan, and not giving DPW the funds they need to do the job. Second, we were borrowing it every year, so we are still kind of working off the money we bonded in the past while we're trying to pay this. So that's one of the things that's driving our debt service. What we did when we went from bonding, I'm going to say almost everything, to trying to put it in our operating budget, is that we said, look, we're going to ramp this up. So we did $500,000 one year, 1.5 million, 2.5 million, 3.5 million as part of our plan. Then we bonded up front the filler to make sure that was $3.5 million across all those roads. So we gave DPW a whole bunch of money up front. So last year, as much as it shows here that we had 2.5 million, or forgive me, this year, fiscal 13, that we have 2.5 million in our operating budget, we have that plus $1 million worth of bonded. Right? So we were at 3.5 million this year.
Okay.
All right. And the issue is, when you're doing it every year, you're right, except that any interest you pay is higher than just writing out the check for the... Now, if we're doing special projects or doing an exceptional amount, and part of what we tried to do a few years ago is fill that in so that it's smooth to phase in our transition to the operating budget. I just think at this point, you know, my perspective is that $1 million a year was perhaps a bit aggressive in terms of the ramp up for that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Walk.
Thank you, First Selectman Tetro, for joining us. My question is, and please don't take this in the wrong way, or anybody, I'm understanding right now that we're at a 2.91 increase on our taxes, correct? The majority of letters that I'm receiving are complaining why we can't get this down to 2%, or in the rate of inflation. So, just to make this clear to everybody, if we bring this down another %, what would that do to the town? In other words, where would this cut have to, where would the money come from in order to bring this down? What would it do to the town in order to bring this down to 2%? If I'm trying to understand this myself, how we're going to get that down to 2%, because I think we're at a point where that's where we should be at.
I think the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance has taken their best shot at providing the most reasonable tax increase and balance that with what the needs of the town are. It's up to this body to choose if you think that should be any lower. So I'm not sure it should be. So if you're asking me where you're going to cut, that's hard for me to tell you what adjustments this body is going to make after reviewing what's been done and after reviewing what you're going through over the next few nights.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mike, let me just dovetail on that question. I think
at this point in time, if I were to ask any member of the Board of Finance, they would feel that they've reasonably budgeted the aggregate services which we need to provide in a responsible way. And I think at this point in time, the decision before the RTM is, in order to cut it, what's the trade-off, as Jay sort of alluded to, but let me be more specific than that, and we're kind of, and it's too big a question for you to answer in 25 words or less, and it's what we're going to have to decide over the next month. What does $2 million represent in services that become casualties of that cut? And I don't expect the answer right now, but I think, you know, that's kind of what Jay was getting at, and the answer to the questions we're beginning to ask, because I can tell you from speaking to my constituents at a meeting we had, and be careful what you ask for, but people are saying, I need you to hold the line on tax increase, even if it were to mean the town could provide less service. So I think that's where we're at right now. And maybe that also begs the question, you mentioned at the start of the meeting that come July, you're going to pull out a new sheet of paper and sit down with our bargaining units all over again. And since in one form or another compensation, be it pay, be it health benefits, be it post-retirement benefits, fundamentally is a driver to the budget. I mean, we've talked about it in different flavors, but if I were to boil it down, it's compensation.
I think certainly as you look at the list of drivers, and certainly as we work through some of those and get those in a better managed situation, what you come back to is just what you said, correct?
Right. So, which long way of getting to the question. Are we going to, I think, personally, I believe that, corporations, speaking to people around it, even corporations are making money. Employees are not receiving year-over-year increases in salary. And we seem to have a disparity between the year-over-year compensations which people in the private sector are receiving, most of whom make up the ranks of the taxpayers, and the year-over-year compensation that municipal workers in the public sector have been realizing in one form or another. And I think it's incumbent upon us as good managers to bring one in line with the other. And I know it's a big ship to turn around. Long way of getting the question. How optimistic are you with a new round of talks before us come July of getting to a point where we bring one in line with the other? Because I think once that happens, where discretionary income is in line with the amount of services the town needs to provide, we won't have this noise level, this level of angst that we've heard this time around. I think that fundamentally is the problem, that we have a disparity between what people are receiving year over year in increases, those who pay the taxes, those who fund everything, and a process or a system which is not in line with that. How optimistic are you that we can bring this in line in a short period of time? That's a terrible question, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I should be ashamed.
Yep.
It is your fault. But.
And there are several different components of that. Let me do my best to address that. One, you've seen that the contracts that we brought forward in the last year, I think we've made significant changes in a number of the key components in those. As with all things, we've brought in one of the top attorneys in the state to work with us to represent the town in this regard, to make sure we're aware of what's happening elsewhere, and that we're doing the best we can for the citizens of the town in stepping through that. There are because of the state rules on binding arbitration, that type of thing, there are certain constraints in terms of how the negotiating program is working. But I think that, based on what we've seen so far, I think the unions have been, and their leadership, realize it's a different economy and certainly understand that from a starting point. In trying to change all of those, there's a certain kind of, there's salaries, there's insurance benefits, there's pension, and there's the retiree medical benefits, and we are talking about all four of those. So to your point, you can optimize any one of those. At some point, the question is, when you're working on those, which ones are in the best interest of the town, and trying to balance both the short-term needs as well as the long-term needs, and to be fair to our employees at the same time.
Understood.
So
It's an aggregate approach, and that's why I understand you can have trade-offs within the components of compensation.
Yeah.
But I'm looking to bring aggregate compensation in line. I mean, the other thing, if you turn the clock back 30 years, I mean, one of the...
I'd be a lot younger.
As would we all. I'd be in high school. No.
No, Mr. McCarthy, I know you wouldn't be. And I just want to be respectful of everyone's time. We have, before I call on Representative Hannum for this evening's discussion, Mr. Mayor, I just want to thank you, Mr. Tetreault, Mrs. Gardner, Ms. Bossy, for your time tonight. There was another component of this, and I want to make sure that you have answers on anything on debt service while Mr. Mayor and staff are here. So with that, we also have Mr. Leslie and Mr. Michelangelo and Mr. Bartlett here as well. So, Mr. Hannum.
Okay, I'm probably only going to take up about 20 or 30 minutes, so everyone just relax.
That won't leave time for the answer.
Actually, this is a comment and maybe a question at some point. We've all been getting a lot of emails of constituents saying across the board, let's keep the taxes down. Yeah, I want to keep the taxes down too. I live here like anybody else. I have learned so much that the rest of the constituents don't hear because we go to these meetings. And there's a big disconnect as far as what we know and what's out there. They're saying, well, keep the taxes down to 2% or whatever comes out. And Mr. Tetreault said something tonight that is, it light bulb went off in my head. Wow, we're doing a lot of things in the back office that no one knows about. And we're paying some debts from down the road that's going to make us better in the future. And that doesn't get boiled down to a 2% or a 3% tax increase. And no one sees that. They see a number. They see, oh man, Fairfield's going to 4%, and Trumbull or some other town is at 2%. Why can't we do that? They don't see that. So I don't know how we can make that, how we can tell the rest of the population, the people that we represent, that we're doing it because of the bigger picture. I don't know. That being said, I agree with my colleagues in that we need to keep taxes down, and I appreciate everything that the town bodies do, and I realize that people are the people in the town bodies are cutting things to the bone. I'm not going to single out any area or any department head. Everyone really pares things down, and no one really looks at the big picture. So that being said, more of a comment. You guys are doing a good job. We have to go back to the people that are seeing us on the streets while we're walking our dogs saying, why are my taxes going up? And I'm going to say, you know what? Because we're doing stuff that we have to do, and there's a lot of stuff in the back office that you don't know about. How can we get that out? And where are we going to go from here? Mr. Tetreault?
I think you're pointing out a number of good points, and I think that gets back to one of the challenges not only that you face, I think, but certainly I face in my position in town is communication and trying to get all the facts out there. At the end of the day, we may agree or disagree, but we want to be talking about the same set of facts. So I think your point's well taken. We'll try and do a better job of getting some of this background out. Certainly tonight's session, being on Fair TV, is a help in doing that. So thank you for your questions.
I had Representative Carey first.
Good evening. As I'm going through the budget, I'm looking at, we have cost drivers that are large numbers, and we also have cost drivers that are small numbers. And if you count your pennies, your dollars count themselves. And I have a couple of questions about some of the smaller numbers, and then also about just in general, in town hall, there are different seasons that are very busy for certain departments and different seasons that are busier for others, that are low times for the other departments. Registrar of Voters obviously is far more busy in the fall, budgeting far more busy in the spring. My question is, in town hall, can we, and I don't like eliminating positions, however, can we look at positions and figure out how we can have departments that are busier during the spring pick up the slack and when there's slower times, help out in other departments, so that we don't necessarily need to carry a staff that has downtime during those other parts of the year. Can we ask full-time clerks or secretaries to pick up the slack for and eliminate a part-time clerk position? For the clerk, it's my brain is drawing a blank on, but my understanding is it was a stipend for it's not the financial clerk.
Clerk for the Board of Finance.
There you go. The clerk for the Board of Finance was a stipend position that was, I believe, $3,000 or $4,000, and now it's a $12,000 position. And those, if you count all of those pennies, those dollars begin to add up, and perhaps then we can get to our budget that's closer to what our taxpayers are asking, which is that 2% budget. Another question I had was advertising.
Just to be clear, the clerk of the Board of Finance and the compensation is a decision that's made by the Board of Finance, not by the administration.
Okay, and that's, I guess, and that's another question we can go back to the Board of Finance with. But there are other positions within, here, let's see, for the First Selectman's office, your office. We have an administrative assistant for the Selectman, and we have a secretary for the First Selectman. Can you pick up some of the slack? And do we need, what do those administrative assistants and those secretaries do for you that's truly invaluable? Can you pick up some of that?
Okay. This is throwing salt in the wound.
I'm sorry.
As of 2 nights ago, there were 5 people on my team. There are now 3 starting July 1st. The chief of staff position was cut for 6 months, and one of the administrative assistants was eliminated in its entirety.
Yes. Can we do that in other departments?
I'm not sure you can do it in mine. That's a 40% head cut.
You can
However,
do it. We know you can.
Thank you. Simply put, if you look at the number of employees on the town side, we have fewer employees in town now than we did in 2003. Okay, so the number of heads in town hall has not been increasing.
Okay.
If you look at each department, you can find each department that's had more heads in the past than they do now.
Okay. Administrative services, the part-time clerk. There's 2 part-time clerks. Can those overlap with another department?
If that's the administrative services number that I'm thinking of, those part-time clerks answer the main switchboard at town hall.
Okay. For $24,000, can we do it with 1 clerk? For
Then you have residents calling up asking for help. I mean, we're a service business. That's what we do. You have residents calling up asking for help. and the phone doesn't get answered.
One of my questions along through the budget, through the whole process, has been, can we look at how we do our daily business? And as much as we like to have somebody on the phone, can we have some, a telephone program? If you need this department, go here. If you need this department, go here. And then rotate among employees of, during your downtime, maybe this is where, when registrar of voters, during your downtime, this is your task. I know at central office, when they need somebody up at the front desk, it's become this year that they rotate within the department of who is up at the front desk. There's only one person there. There always has to be somebody there.
I mean, the simple thing is there might be more flexibility on the Board of Ed side than there is on the town side. The town side has run pretty lean for quite a while. If you go back to each department, and I will take, be it zoning, be it building, even though when we look at that, when you look at what's happened with Storm Sandy, we have a lot more permits, a lot more reconstruction going on. That impacts zoning, wetlands, as well as the building department. It's all
Okay.
part of that.
Registrar of voters, in most towns, it's not open from 9 o'clock in the morning until, it's not open 5 days a week. It's only open on, during non-voting season. It's not open more than one morning a week, one afternoon a week. Different towns have, that it's open from 10 until 2.
I would think that if I had questions about the registrar of voters, you might
Speak with them.
ask Mr. Steele as moderator, to invite them in to talk. We have 2 elected registrars and 1 full-time employee in that office.
Right.
The part-time employees, as part of that budget, are called in kind of as needed during election cycles or primary cycles. But I would encourage you to talk to the registrar of voters to kind of step through that and have them explain how the labor is allocated.
And I'm just going to interrupt for a second,
And,
because if we want other departments to come in and answer specific questions, we can either, do that by email or however we want to do it. But if there are other departments we want to bring in, then I kind of leave Monday as the time to do it after an already busy Board of Ed hearing. We all had the chance to request department heads here. Nobody requested the registrars. That doesn't mean we can't bring them in still. No, we still can. But maybe some of these questions could be answered prior to, through emails. But if you do want them, I do need to know. We want to get any other departments that...
I would also encourage you, because the Board of Finance stepped through a lot of this in detail, and one of the questions asked of every single department head that went before the Board of Finance is, if you had to cut, where could you cut? And that is available on Fair TV On Demand. So you can look at any one of those
Right, and-
departments based on
but
that schedule.
What my point is I would hope that you as first selectman, you're in the offices every day. You're our town manager. You know where we can make adjustments, and I'm hoping that you're also supporting our departments in analyzing how they do business and adjusting and making adjustments to how we operate on our daily basis.
Yep, that's one of the things that is on the task list for my chief of staff.
All right.
And you're his, all right, yep, thank you.
I have Representative Mayer, and then I had a question over here. Was it Representative Dean? And I saw Representative Mezoff. And then I think that's it for this round. We need to talk to Mr. Mayer if he has more on his presentation that he wants to make after these 3 questions. I'm going to ask you to try to consolidate your questions and ask them in a direct fashion.
Yeah, mine's more of a statement apropos of the conversations going around about the services here. I think my constituents have said, we'll take the cut, but we want to know that you are going to fight for us, because the driver in pension and health is unsustainable. We cannot continue to pay these kind of prices, so we need for you to go into these union contracts and say, enough. That's what they want to hear from you. I know their procedures, but other towns are cutting and saying, bye-bye. this is all you're going to get. Take it or leave it. And I think this is the time that we need for you to do this for us. And I know that the community would be behind you. Thank you.
Thank you. And simply put, we have been doing that. That's what the
We have.
contracts we brought in. And if there are any towns that have done better than us, please point me in that direction, and I will sit down and
I'll
talk to
find
those,
them.
okay? Please do.
Thank you.
Representative Dean?
Thank you. And to dovetail on the, specifically about the healthcare, I was very pleased to find out that there was a reduction in costs with regards to bids going out and being able to have the plans come in at lower cost. That was excellent. Specifically, I'm concerned about the level of plans that we're offering. And I don't know what other towns are offering. I only know what's being offered in the private sector, myself included, with what I provide as a small business owner for my family and what we pay and the benefits that we have. And I recognize that there is some, there's negotiating going on that you really can't get into with us as you're going into it with your team. But I would like to go on the record that I want to know that there's going to be consideration to reduce the level of these plans that we're offering and more in line with the private sector. And that's my question. Would you consider that?
We're going to do our best to make sure these plans are cost-effective and competitive across the board.
Representative Mezov?
I just have a couple of very quick questions. One is a philosophical question about, the idea that Tom McCarthy talks. Tom is not there. Tom McCarthy talks about the reduction of service equals reduction in taxes. I know that consideration has been given, but can you give me some example of consideration that's given to? There are certain users of services. We all need public safety. We all need DPW. There are services that everyone needs. There are some services that the town offers that benefit some people, and I could see an instance where fees could be increased so that the taxes for those of us who don't use those services could be decreased. Is there a philosophical examination of that at some point?
I think that's, from my standpoint, exactly what I identified as part of the budget message, going back, looking at the programs we provide, the services we offer, doing an analysis of that, complete evaluation in terms of, what do we charge for those, which ones can we get rid of, modify, which ones can we charge more for, so but I think that's got to be a focused task. The other question you didn't ask, but let me kind of expand into that too, is that, we've got a number of the same, I'm going to call them operational functions that are performed by the Board of Ed and by the town. Now, for years, we've talked about kind of looking at that, and I think that what we've got to have is a greater sense of urgency about making sure between now and the next budget, we do a serious look at those and come back and say, look, here's the areas we've looked at, here's some things we can combine and cooperate on and do better on, and frankly, here's some we looked at and we can't, because for these reasons, there's no economy of scale, even though you'd think it would.
Right. Final comment that I'd like to make, and it does somewhat address Representative Carey's comments, is that micromanaging departments from the RTM I don't think it's terribly productive. I have deep concerns about cuts to public safety when you look at the number of officers in Fairfield compared to 15 other towns that are within 8% of our population. We're the second lowest. I'm concerned about that. I'm also concerned about the productivity and the general well-being of people in Town Hall, especially managers in Town Hall, who simply can't accomplish tasks because they've been cut. Those are the kinds of things that there has to be a balance. I am very much on the page as everyone else is that the taxes have to be decreased, but when productivity starts going down and people start dropping the ball, and then you start having serious problems, it costs more to clean it up than to get it done right the first time. So there's got to be a balance. That's an opinion.
And I think, and again, back to Representative Carey's point, I think she raised a good one, and I think that With any department head, you can look at your department, and there are plenty of examples of where folks have looked at modifying and improving their department. I think to your point, what I heard, my takeaway, was that it's on the lines between departments that you have to look at, because at any one person, once you're outside their territory, they don't always see that as well, or there's not as much communication, and occasionally maybe some territorialism that keep that from happening. And so the most obvious or the biggest component of that to me was, as I mentioned, the Board of Ed and the town coming back, looking at where there's some synergy and some things that we can share and do a better job on. And because those are bigger departments and bigger numbers, that might be the biggest bang for the buck, if you will, if we can work out those cooperative pieces. I've already talked to Dr. Teitel. We've agreed that we'll sit down starting in May so that we kind of make as much progress as we can on that before the next budget season. Independent of that, there are certain departments that we can look at. And the other opportunity, I think, is for technology. One of the things that disappointed me out of that whole operational audit, for those of you that were around back in the day when we did that, was I didn't hear a single recommendation on the town side where we could use technology to make improvements. Now, simplistically, we just did that with cameras on buses, right? We've never handed out tickets for people passing school buses because there was never a cop there, and all we could do is get a license number, and then we could say, it was reported that you did, but I can't prove that you did. So now we have cameras. The state passed a law that says that is a reliable witness. So if we take your picture, you're doing it, you're paying $450. All right, so the whole idea is not to collect the $450 necessarily, but to keep you from speeding. You pay a few $450 tickets, I'm betting you won't do that around a school bus again. But that uses technology with no benefit costs. In this case, no cost to the town, because we're splitting the revenue with the company that's putting in the cameras to improve our service levels and performance and make our streets safer. I think there are a lot of other opportunities. We're trying to get the technology component into building department, both from using iPads out in the field, so there's better reporting coming back, as well as putting terminals in the building department that let them check things in Old Town Hall, so somebody doesn't have to go back there to confirm that the taxes are paid and up to date, that type of thing. So I think there's lots of opportunity from that standpoint to do a better job.
An iPad, answering the phones and walking along
Mr. Mayor, did you have?
Yeah, one of the agenda items that was revenue, and you receive during this period, it's just a flurry of mail. So I just want to bring your attention to 3 reports that were produced this year by the Finance Department, which are new this year. They're in your package. I'm not going to go through them. I just want to make sure you're aware of them and what they consist of. 3 revenue reports, one of which was referenced earlier in the conversation, which is called the Executive Summary of All Revenue by Source. It's a regular top-to-bottom type report. It has by source, and it starts with actual for fiscal years 11-12, budget for 13, the original budget for 14. The revenue has not changed. And then it has a summary by source, like licenses, permits, state grants, et cetera, and there's information related to each of the major line items, so you can get a general idea. A second new report that you have is the scheduled proposed budget revenue by department. So if you want to see, okay, what happens in the tax collections department? So fees, services, license permits, service charges, they're all normally what you've seen those is by source, all the fees together, all the services together, all the taxes together, all the grants together. Here, it's by department. And it's broken out by 4 categories, in addition to the years, as to how those revenues were estimated. The easiest one being, what the anticipated tax levy is. That number, of course, has changed because the budget has changed. Then there's a column that's the department head estimate, where the department head has actually gone through calculations based upon historical information, what they see happening this year, and based on their experience and what they know, what might happen next year. Third category is a source document. This would be like a governor's budget, leases, anything where it's a contract, where it's a written. And then the 4th column and the 4th category is for those where it's really difficult to, where there is no source document, where the department head doesn't have a sense from the historical what it might be, and it's a smaller diminished amount, and that's used based on a 3-year average. And then, in addition to that, in the final document is the proposed revenue by source by department, which is a much thicker document, which has definitions, a narrative, and an explanation of almost every major line item, and why we think, why the decision, the information that was used to base the decision on the amount. So that's available by, like, whether it's, you know, the solid waste and recycling, Parks and Rec, Health Department, Town Clerk, you know, every department that has revenue, Building Department. So you can look for those and enjoy your reading. And thank you all.
Yes, I want to thank you for that. I have a question for Mr. Palmer, and then Representative Stamler, if we can close that out and then transition to in IT. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Tetreault, we've come a long way since the 6.4 proposal, and you've been really gracious with members of the RTM, including myself, and you know, along the way, keeping us posted on how things have developed in terms of the adjustments and you know, all the different trends that have occurred since it was proposed. And I know that both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance have done a lot of hard work in looking at this budget and making some tough decisions. So there are some services that have already been cut. There's been some staff, and you know, that's going to have an impact. But I still think there's, you know, the question is out there amongst, you know, some of us here, including myself, just but I don't want to put you on the spot here and make you answer it and kind of list anything out, and I think that's kind of a tough thing. But if we were to go down to, if we were going to, let's say, if the mechanism were here where the RTM could, you know, make an across-the-board cut, let's say, to get us down to the rate of inflation, or wanted that, would it be something that you could maybe look at and get back to us on, just to be able to say, and I think the number would be around $2 million to get to that 2% or that number. But we last year we had gone through a, you know, very late in the stage process of asking for, you know, look at a 2% across the board cut, and you know, we you know, I think that sent a lot of the department scrambling. There wasn't a lot of time to even discuss it. But I think there's a good enough time now between, you know, where we are here and our budget time to be able to, you know, get some of these ideas out there on the table. It would be something personally that I think I would like to get an understanding of. And the reason is, and again, I know that there's been a lot of hard work, tough decisions to get where we are here, but that's still a snapshot into just this year. You know, it doesn't really help us understand even next year how we're going to be able to absorb any increases that are unpredictable with some of these drivers. This, you know, the health insurance, I think, surprised a lot of people, and it could, if the data were different, we'd be in a much different place right now. And you know, the taxpayers just simply can't absorb that type of increase. So, would that be something that you could take a look at, or maybe we, you know, I don't know if even at, you know, at the end of this we can get a sense of the body, if that's something that we want to, you know, all have the first selectman address. But I think that would be something that, you know, could answer that question.
You know, simply, if you give us a request, we'll do our best to honor it.
Okay.
Thank you. Representative Stamler?
Yeah, a very quick question for Mr. Mayor, but before that, just a quick comment. There has been reference very, very often in our deliberations to public and private sector comparison. Are they in parity? Are they not? And I would just submit, this is not a discussion for now or here, but there are some significant differences between the public and the private sector that I think it would be helpful for us to try to understand and explore. Of course, there are some ways they should be regarded together, but there are differences, and some of us have spent our lives in one sector and the other. So this is just a recommendation for the future. Quick question for Mr. Mayor. On the subject of expense and revenue, looking at the munis, which were provided so quickly to us, the overall in the revenue, it looks like we're about 76% of the way spent to the end of the year, and we're three-quarters through the year. Do we anticipate being at 100% by the end of the year? And in expenses, it looks like we are at about 40% at this point. Do we expect to be at 100%, if I'm reading these correctly? I'm looking at the bottom line.
Yeah, the munis reports are, you know, they have, like, for example, if you look at the expenditure report on July 1st of the year, it would show that you were over in your wage and salary line item by, you know, some thousands of percent because they encumber 100% of it. So from that perspective, you can't look at the totals on the munis reports because of the governmental accounting regs and the way encumbrances are accounted for. You have to look at line items. However, to answer your question, other than going through the reports, we've spent a lot of time, a lot of work, a lot of effort trying to identify where we think we're going to be at the end of the year in total. And the major benefit that we had this year was when the town in July issued the bonds for $37 million worth of bonds and $12 million worth of bands. The bondholders like to get streams of money, so sometimes they pay you cash in advance to get a higher interest rate going forward, okay? And they did pay us $2.9 million in cash. Now, that's not a revenue that has to be used to go to reduction of debt payments in the future, in that current year or future, okay? That was the biggest positive. The estimate that was in the budget for this year for that was approximately $400,000, so you had like a $2.5 million positive variance there. The biggest negative in the budget is a catch-up in the contingency account, which was severely understated in the prior year's budget. So, but when you put all, and then of course the second biggest negative is the impact of in the town costs to Storm Sandy, then you have Storm Nemo, you know, et cetera, okay? Where we think we are right now, it appears that we could have a potential favorable variance of about $500,000. That $500,000 has been used this year based upon a vote of the Board of Selectmen to take that 2.5 excess from the bond premium, which is required to be used to pay down debt, to not use it to reduce the debt service payment this year, but to reduce the debt service payment next year. So next year's, the amount, next year being fiscal year 2014. So as we talked earlier, there's a specific schedule that details what we have to pay next year. The amount is set in stone. And again, repeating myself, bond premium is required to be paid, used to be paid down debt. So we're going to be using most of that to pay down, to reduce the amount that was budgeted this year, debt service, but based upon the total variance analysis, we're moving 500,000 of that into next year. So next year's budget is reduced by $500,000 from that variance analysis.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the explanation.
Again, I want to take the time to thank you, Mr. Tetreault, Mr. Mayor, Mrs. Gardner, Ms. Bassi, for joining us tonight. It was very informative. Mr. Leslie, you are on our schedule, and I see Ms. Nash is here with you. If any other members of the body want to join us, if there's room at the table, please feel free to do that.
Can I just ask one thing, then we go ahead and do the Munis thing right off the bat, and that way Ms. Nash can move on?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
If you would just take the time to introduce yourselves for all the members of the body. Thank you.
Hi, Don Leslie, Director of IT for the town.
Nancy Burns, formerly Nash, Manager of IT for the Board of Education.
Okay, your presentation this evening is in regards to the IT budget, but do you want to begin on at a particular point? Do you have something that you want to reference so we all are on the same page?
You should have had in your hands out the 5-year analysis for the Munis financial system. Am I seeing a positive response?
There were a number of emails that were sent out today. I am not sure at what point that email was sent out to us.
Okay. I've got a couple of copies. I don't have a... Okay. Sure, go ahead. They're both the same?
No.
Or,
No, I didn't get that. Or maybe I did. Wait a
Thank you,
minute.
Ms. Burns.
Let me look. Let me look. Baby.
Thanks, Tom. Copies are being made for us, so we can begin.
I'll talk about other stuff then.
Certainly.
I started this budget season, First Selectman advised me that while things are looking a little bit better, financially speaking, that it is certainly not a want budget, it is a need budget. With that in mind, I put out my needs. After that point, I sat down with the First Selectman, and he cut $50,000 approximately out of my budget. And then I went in front of the Board of Finance, and they cut out $61,000 out of my budget and moved $100,000, which this Munis discussion is a part of, into a contingency fund. If you feel like cutting anything more, one of two things are going to happen. Either I am going to have to stop having certain services of some kind or another, or I'm going to get into a lot of trouble if anything breaks. I will not be able to buy anything new, and I would have problems with contracts for maintenance and warranty issues. So, to me personally, I really enjoy IT. I've been doing it for 35 years. I know what needs to be done. There was a discussion about, is there an IT plan? There's an IT plan in that I follow the best practices around. I talk to other managers. I'm part of the Government Managers Information Systems Group, and I go to meetings with them, and we talk about what we're doing and how we're doing it and the things that we're doing. I came in front of this board talking about the virtualization of servers, which we've been doing for a number of years now, and that's where some of these warranty costs are kicking in. I just want to let you know from I live in town too. I'd love to have no taxes. I've been looking at South Carolina that has an effective tax rate of something like 0.5 or something like that. And we're up at the 2+ range.
And it's warmer.
Yes. So someone will probably say, well, Mr. Leslie, if you have to cut something else out, what would you cut out? And I'd say nothing, because I've already been cut twice, significantly cut twice. My department's not that big. Someone was asking about secretaries and administrative assistants. That's me. I'm the manager. I help at the help desk. I go repair problems when other people are busy. So, I'd love to have an administrative assistant. I've asked for an IT network engineer to handle the phone and the new phone system that we're trying to get in, which would handle part of that problem with the front desk you were talking about. But that got cut. I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me, and just tell me if I'm flat out wrong here, to bring someone in during the beginning stages of the project so that when they have to take it over, they know it by heart. There is nothing worse in IT than having someone hand you a machine that's a production machine and say, this is your job to take care of it. They can't touch it. It's a production machine. The only time you can really touch something like that in IT is when it breaks or there's a problem. Then you can say, oh, sorry people, phone system's going to be down for 3 days because blah, blah, blah broke. But if you sit there and bring in a new person and have him work on a system that's already in place, that just got put into place, I mean, it's like buying a new house. There are going to be glitches and things like that. But isn't it a lot better to have this guy in there ahead of time so that he sees how it's built, he helps put it together, so he's intimately knowledgeable of this, yet the Board of Finance didn't see that. They said, you know, and I wanted him in for the whole year to help when the consultant starts up, so he could work with the consultant saying, hey, listen, I know about this, you know about this, and he could actually get some knowledge, and between the two of them, they could have some synergy and maybe come out with even a better system than just the consulting company by itself. But that got cut to half a year. So I said, okay, well, that's fine. But if I get the guy in when the system's coming in, when we pick the vendor, to me, that made a lot of sense. But, you know, hey, it's a tough time. It was cut. So I think I thought that one was a pound penny wise and a pound foolish.
We all now have copies of the material that you passed out. Could you just briefly walk us through? We have Munis Software as a Service 5-year investment comparison.
Right.
On the left side is Software as a Service, and then on the right side is a self-hosted solution. Could you just kind of walk us through what this document is?
Asked to put this together. It's
Burns.
And the other thing we should know is that it's a town, it's both sides of the fence, the financial system.
Thank you.
What I proposed, and as Don put it, this affects both the town and the Board of Ed, is we were looking for a solution for the Munis financial system that would be more effective for us as a town, given our experience with disaster recovery and the storms that we've had. In addition to that, I was also looking for some flexibility in splitting the database, which is something Don's really wanted to do, and would be more effective for both entities, if you will, because there are nuances that are specific to the town's way of doing business versus the Board of Ed's, and we tend to step on each other's because we share a database right now. In addition to that, we also anticipated that there was a financial crunch from a capital standpoint facing us in about another year, because we'll be at end of life with the equipment that we invested in and put at Burr Elementary School as our disaster recovery area. So what we did was we took a look at what Munis could do for us, which is what they call software as a service. In other words, we pay them a fee every year, and they deliver through the internet our access to our financial system. We don't pay for hardware. We don't pay for cooling the hardware. We don't pay for warranties on the hardware. We don't pay them anything in addition other than this flat fee. So we don't have to buy equipment that we replace. We don't have to buy UPSs for it. We don't have to have people managing it, other than just calling Munis up when we have an issue. So that's what the software as a service is there. Now, it is more expensive on the face of it than the current amount of money that we spend both jointly between the town and the Board of Ed each year for the maintenance plan on the software. In other words, we pay Munis a fee every year to be able to use the software that we invested in, I think it was 4 years ago. So if you follow the chart, on the left you'll see software as a service is one flat fee. You know what the number is. And I anticipated a percentage increase each year because they usually build that into their budget.
Year one is?
Year one is the fee we negotiated with them if we move forward with this.
Fiscal year 13?
Fiscal year next year is 14.
Okay. Year one is 14.
It would be effective July 1st if we went forward with it. On the right side is the self-hosted solution, which is what is happening now. And the reason I'm speaking to you is that when the Munis system was purchased, it was installed in the Board of Education offices, so my department runs it. We also run the disaster recovery system that's at Burr. So what I did was I ran down the different costs associated with that program. In the first line, you'll see the $162,000, for example, in year one, is the current maintenance fee we pay Tyler Munis. Tyler Technologies is the parent company to use their software. We also pay them an additional $30,000 a year for what they call OSDBA support, which is something Don and I both agree is necessary and is part of the maintenance plan. So it's really $192,976. Then I took the cost of the production environment hardware, the Burr disaster recovery site, and then the support costs associated with it, and I ran it down the spreadsheet. So I can go into detail if anybody wants to ask me what any of those particular things are. And I carried those calculations over 5 years, and you'll see that it's going to save us a couple of bucks, but it's pretty much a break-even proposition. But it's the benefits that I think are huge. We don't have to worry about the hardware. In a disaster, if we have an internet connection and a printer, we're in business. We don't have to worry about, we can't get to Burr because there's too many trees down, or we don't have power, or the generator didn't work, or we can't get gas for the generator, or the particular building was damaged, or the roof blew off. It gives us a lot of flexibility from that perspective, which was something that we were somewhat concerned about. And frankly, you're talking about labor costs, it reduces the impact on the departments that are supporting the product because we're not managing all that hardware and all those sophisticated systems that we currently have.
See glaze.
Did you say glaze?
Glazed eyes. Mr. McCarthy.
So you're not refreshing hardware every 3 years, every 5 years, going
Correct.
out and getting new uninterrupted power supplies and
Exactly.
storage? This is all sitting in a cave someplace in Colorado on a raised floor?
Right. Well, actually, it's Maine, but they also have redundancy sites, and they're paying for the redundancy.
Okay.
Yeah, and they, obviously have many clients that are using the system. I think there's something like, if I remember correctly, between 30 and 40 Connecticut municipalities already doing this.
Yeah, okay, I think it makes sense. I don't think the town should be in the business of going out and acquiring new services and refreshing hardware every 5 years, 3 years, or 2.5.
Yeah, we aim for 4. We usually make it at about 6.
I know that, yeah.
Aren't you moving up, or your lease is up too?
Well, Don brings up a good point. We don't know how long the Board of Ed will maintain itself in this facility, too. So we wouldn't have to relocate the Munis servers as part of any Board of Ed relocation.
Just a quick question on the electrical costs. Is that electricity or is that hookup like
No, that's
physical?
electrical costs, like utility bill.
That's purely utility bill.
Representative Lee? Do you have a question?
No, I just wanted to comment briefly, because this is what I do, so it's the only thing I'm really qualified to speak about. I just remember when I moved back here, I don't remember what year it was, might have been 2005, 2006, but it seems to me we had a problem with one of the servers, and then we discovered that the backup system didn't work. I worked for investment companies, and I happened to work for a systems company at Fidelity Investments, and I happened to work in the support group for backups. We backed up thousands of servers every night. This makes a lot of sense because financial records are things that we just cannot afford to do without for any period of time. And most of the cost of running systems isn't buying the server, it's supporting the stuff. To take that off of their plate and make them available to keep people working makes a huge amount of sense. If it didn't save $1, it makes a lot of sense. So I just wanted to say that I think this is a really fine idea.
Any other questions?
Hi, are there any other areas of, within the IT infrastructure that we could apply this kind of strategy where we're utilizing software versus kind of housing everything internally? Is it just, what other areas? You mentioned the database. Maybe expound.
I'll let Don speak for his side of the department, and I probably should wait until the Board of Ed discussion on Monday. Monday? I think it's Monday. But yes, there are an awful lot of, for example, subscription-based services that the Board of Ed currently uses instead of the disk software that used to be installed in the desktop computers that the kids would access. 99% of what we buy now is some kind of subscription service. It's usually through the internet. There's usually no client that's downloaded. Sometimes there is, but those are usually those are pretty much getting phased out now. So it reduces our overhead. You know, one of the things I'm looking at to try to stretch our dollars internally is virtual desktops, serving it up so that the kids have access to what they need and we don't have to buy the higher end types of equipment except for those really specialized fields. So we continue to look at ways we can consolidate. We've also virtualized a lot, just like the town side has. When I first started, we had over 60 servers. Now most of those are virtual as opposed to physical.
One of the things is in my budget is the QSend, the Web 311 system. We're using QSend now. All your agendas and meeting minutes that you see on the main web page is the QSend CRM backend system. That was a big push a couple of years ago, but we only went a little way into that, and now we just recently had a little extra money to QSend to finish the migration of the town departments into the CRM system, which will make it easier for them to keep keep the public informed of what's going on. They'll be able to update their web pages a lot easier and stuff than in the past. And then the other piece of it is, another new piece, module of it is for $24,000 in my budget for a 311 system, which is a resident information system whereby, just as a simple example, we have the pothole system. I don't know if any of you guys realize it's out there, but you can actually send an email to Pothole, or you can click on the town website and fill out a little form and say where it is and what it is and stuff like that. Well, it takes that and magnifies it about 1,000 times, in the sense that they can also call in, and I could use it as a trouble reporting system for the IT help desk. We've got a little simple system now that we try to use that keeps track of things, but it doesn't get used as much as it should. This would be a lot better. This would also be talking about paving and stuff like that. You know, the person could sit there and put in, you know, trees falling down or whatever across my driveway, and you guys have to take it out, and it gives feedback to the resident and stuff. So that's an example of, you know, using an online service to help us manage the system. So. Others?
Anybody have any questions on Ms. Burns' presentation or for Mr. Leslie's budget? Mr. McCarthy.
One quick question, and I'm asking this every department head, and you made a comment in your opening remarks, and please excuse what I'm about to ask you. It may seem like I'm bayoneting the wounded, but you mentioned that were we to cut anything else, it would represent service. Can you identify a service you would not be able to provide in the event that your budget would be further reduced?
I don't think there's an actual individual service. I think things would go later. I mean, if you cut another $8,000 out of my budget, I might have to let my part-time person, seasonal person that I got from the Fairfield High School, who's doing a great job in helping the help desk support. He's sort of the gopher of the group, but he's really smart and he's helping a lot. So that might be something that has to go. If you cut really deeply, you can say goodbye to Fair TV. What else? You know, it's just, you know, I'm there, you know. You want to take some more out. He's strong. It's, you know, you know, basically what'll happen is if you take some more money out of my budget, I'll do what I do until I can't do it anymore, and then I'm either going to come back for more money or something's not going to get done.
Okay, I don't want you thrashing.
Go ahead, David.
Give him the chair.
Well, so we've heard a little bit about software as a service. I did hear, Ms. Burns, you mentioned Burr as being a backup site. And this kind of really goes to maybe both of you here, but shifting our backup and our recovery kind of more towards a cloud-based model. Obviously, the virtualized desktops starts actually even getting down to the individual unit being worth even less and it being able to shift there. But that to me seems like an area where we maybe can drive some of our costs down. We've got, I think, if I'm correct, Woods Library still houses, is that where the town size backup is?
The town side of the backup is at Woods, yes.
So we're kind of supporting two backup sites. We've got, several main sites, and at least the backup and maybe even the day-to-day, in theory, could be shifted there. I know it's kind of a big trend on the corporate side to drive some costs, and even electricity. I mean, there's a lot of things. And
Right.
I was hoping you could speak of that,
Sure,
because that's a long-term thing.
On the Board of Ed side, Munis notwithstanding, we have the disaster recovery place because we needed a place for people to physically go and be able to attach to the software, because Munis didn't offer this when we first set it up all those years ago, which is why I became excited about it, because of all the things I said about in my preamble. The other piece that the Board of Ed did a number of years ago is we moved from what was a traditional tape backup type of system, where we, did a snapshot every night, had them secured in a vault, and then weekly had them brought off-site, so we had backup in case there was a serious disaster, a fire or a flood. We've gone to backup in the cloud, and we've been doing that for a couple of years. One of the things I'm happy about with the Munis thing is I've sort of maxed out my space. What we do now is we back up to the DR site, but we also back up to our cloud-based service. But when you subscribe to a cloud-based service, you're still paying for storage, and you still have a limited amount. Well, because Munis will take that burden on, it opens up space for me, so I'm not going to be begging you for additional money to give me more space in my cloud, because I'm going to get that back when and if we move Munis to service. So we've kind of gone in that direction. But you're absolutely correct. We do save money doing that.
And well, the same to Mr. Leslie a little bit with the Woods branch and kind of your direction in moving more towards a cloud-type web environment.
You've got to take each instance of a cloud situation, or a software as a service, as I like to call it, which is the correct term. You've got to take each one individually, and you can't sit there and say, oh, let's just push everything out to the cloud. I'm not saying that that's not the direction that things are going, but the point being is you want to be very careful. As an example, I'm not going to put the fire department system or the police department system at this time out in the cloud. I just feel it's too dangerous a thing to do. There's a great article recently about the internet not being a reliable service. It never was. Don't ever think the internet is a reliable service. It is very good. And there's so much stuff out there that it's become almost reliable. But the internet has always been a best effort. If the internet goes down, who are you going to sue? And if you can't sue someone, that means they're not responsible. They can walk away and they say, sorry, Charlie. The other thing about the internet is if you put stuff out in some of these big spots, how big are you? If you're an IBM or a GE or an AT&T and you put your stuff out there and you yell and scream, they'll jump. If you're a town of 60,000 people, they're not going to jump so fast. You're going to be somewhere on a bottom tier. I'm just trying to point out the reasons why, some of the points that you have to consider, because everybody's these days, oh, the cloud, the cloud, the cloud. No, it's not. It's software as a service out there, you're buying it, and I don't want to sit there and shoot holes in the financial system, because I think that one actually makes sense, because it puts it out there and they have it backed up. If, for some reason, we lose the internet, and it's happened, AT&T went down in Chicago for about 2 or 3 days one time, and everybody was dark there. We had these last 2 storms. Luckily, we didn't lose cell service. We lost some of it, but there was enough cell service around that we could still use it. All this stuff is on the cloud. Being an IT director, I want to have a certain amount of control of the critical systems, the core competencies, the core components of what we're running, so that if push comes to shove and something does go down, I know who I can yell at, I know who I can go after, I can sit there and literally pull people out of bed if I have to get things done. I mean, the police department has done this, and they said, Don, if something like this happens and one of your guys is stuck in a snowstorm in their house and they can't get out, but they do want to help, we'll send out a fire truck, we'll send out a police car, we'll pick them up and we'll bring them in. That's what I want from some of these core systems. And so, do I want to put other things out in the cloud? Sure, if they're non-critical at this point in time, and if they're reliable, like I asked for and it got cut, a new animal control system, because we have an old system that was written in 1995, I think it was, by Diego. Memories come back. That got cut, so I had to upgrade that system. If I'd put it out in the cloud, it would have cost a bit of money, but we'd have a lot more control at the animal control and the dog licensing. I mean, the dog licensing is just one piece of animal control. There's, fines and things for, that gorilla that was down in Stamford or Greenwich or something like that, and things like that. And you can track a whole bunch more stuff with it, so it's got a lot more to offer, but it was cut, so. There are things you can do. Am I willing? She's planning on doing some VDI to the desktop. I'd like to do VDI to the desktop, but right now, every single person in my, not every single person, but I've got a whole bunch of little pockets of individual setups. So for me to do VDI is not as advantageous at this point in time. Will it happen in the future? Probably, 3, 4, or 5 years maybe.
Representative, I'm sorry, Representative Wall, question for IT?
Well, it's not only a question, but it's a, something, just give some people here in our room a little bit of information. Number one, I don't know if anybody in my colleagues who are sitting with us have visited Mr. Leslie's office. Number one, I don't know, his office is in the basement of Town Hall, I believe.
Right, yes.
Right. He doesn't have a view of the sound, by the way. Anyway, his budget is well spent, that's number one. Number two, Fair TV, I don't know if anybody else knows this, Fair TV broadcasts from Mr. Leslie's office.
My hallway. My hallway.
In the hallway, right.
We're working on that.
Right. If you saw where Mr. Leslie works each day, if you want to go visit him, you wouldn't believe, the space that he's in. He is an integral part to this town. To cut any more from his budget would be a detriment to all of us. So I'm in total support of you, Mr. Leslie, and your department. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on IT? Everybody set?
Just one.
Oh, go ahead.
A .gov address to kind of streamline things and make it a little more official. I know a lot of municipalities didn't in their heading.
That has ticked me off so much. You don't believe how many days I've just sit there and cringed at that. Changing names is very hard. My staff is already stressed out now at this point in time. There was fairfieldct.gov. It's out there. I've turned it down now. What happened was originally when they came up with this, I've been doing this since ARPA times. I was there with like one of the first people to get on the internet and domain and doing email. The structure was laid out well by the ARPA people, and you had .com for commercial, you had the org for organizations, you've got the I'm giving you a little history lesson here. And you've got the other one. There's Navy and Mill, and then there's .gov. And what they should have done with .gov was they should have made 50 state ones right below it, ct.gov, right? But instead of doing that, I had fairfieldct.gov. I don't know if you noticed the difference, but there is a missing period in between the word Fairfield and CT. And what it does from a hierarchical point of view, it makes the system a lot more manageable and a lot better. And we went with fairfieldct.org for the town, and we did the town.fairfield.ct.us. So us.ct, Fairfield was done correctly. That one was done right, because then you sit there, I mean, you got to imagine the whole cascading tree down there, And what the government did was said, no, there's just one big right across, you know, so God forbid you have the same name in the same town, in two the same town names in one state. But there is Fairfield, Connecticut, there's Fairfield, New Jersey, there's Fairfield, Illinois, there's Fairfield, right, and so we're all right up there, and so you start typing Fairfield and you get the, I would love to organize it, get it all standardized and put down. The traction of doing that would be significant. Just sit there and think about all the business cards we'd have to get for all the people, and all the paper headings, and all the other stuff. There's a significant cost to it.
I think I would, obviously, to phase in at that level, it would certainly take some time. I know Fairfield had moved over to the fairfieldschools.org. And if I'm correct, I can still send an email to the other addresses and go to those domains. And so, you know, and a lot of that, at least on the server side, as I understand it, you can, you know, you have multiple paths to everybody, and it takes a lot of years to kind of clean up the old. I mean, I've been through some of those transitions myself. In fact, I had a boss at one point who I think he wanted about 5 or 6 different domains and told everyone under the sun different ones for different things, and it's quite a maze. But
Well,
I just make the suggestion, it would be nice.
You're not even taking in the police, the fire, the golf course, all those other domains.
Yeah, I'm making kind of, I'm asking the question, I'm also kind of making the statement. I think that it's somewhere it would be helpful for us to and maybe it's, I think it probably most logically would be fairfieldct.gov and then streamlined, but I think it would be helpful for this town to cut out even all those dots and all of that and whatnot. I don't want to keep it for too long.
I would love to.
But that's
You
kind of
give
my
me the
2
money,
cents.
I'll be happy to do it, and it's going to take a while, and there'll be a lot of pushback from different spots, because I think the school should be inside of our domain, but they've got their own.
I don't get into debate on that. I'm just, I'm putting it out there. I know people have said it.
I mean,
Thank you.
Why isn't it .edu?
Higher educational institution.
I feel you're pretty high up there, you know. Okay. never mind.
Thank you both very much for your
Sure.
time. It's good to be last. Come on up, Mr. Bartlett and Mr. Michelangelo.
I'm actually reeling over losing Jerry and Fair TV. I'm really upset.
Possibly.
Possibly losing.
Or is it that 10 pounds we all talk about? Yeah.
There it is.
Well, welcome this evening. You've been through this a few times before a few other bodies. Do you have a synopsis that you would like to just run through and then open it up to questions?
Sure, I'll talk globally first, and then we could get into the specific line items.
Thank you.
A couple members have mentioned here tonight, and also at the Board of Finance, how your constituents are contacting you about the pressures on the budget and the tax increases. And it's not surprising, because that's what you people do. You set the tax rates and the budgets. From our side, once again, we provide these services, and the people who call us, you know, obviously don't ask us about taxes or budgets, they ask us for service.
Or email Mr. Leslie about the pothole.
Correct. So, so I know you all get, you know, hundreds of emails requesting taxes. Well, we get hundreds, if not more, regarding the services we provide. And just to put it in context, I am shortly moving from Brantford to Fairfield, and I'm paying $50,000 more for my house in Fairfield than I'm selling in Brantford. But my taxes in Fairfield will actually be $700 less than in Brantford. So I'll be the one resident, at least, that'll have my taxes reduced in Fairfield, regardless of the outcome of this process. So looking forward to that. But,
Wait till the assessor comes.
correct.
Assessor's coming.
Welcome to Fairfield.
But, you know, one thing that, you know, struck me when I got here, and it continues to do, is the amount of activities that we're involved in, and you know, but just the roads, both the construction of them and the maintenance of them, street sweeping, snow plowing, and the high level of service we provide, sidewalks, both construction and maintenance of them, our town buildings, our park system, the beaches, the marinas. So there's quite a bit of level of service that the town provides, and it's top-notch. Our residents demand it, and I think we answer the call on every occasion. Another thing that impressed me is the quality of our workers in our system. So we have quite a bit of workers, as you see in the thing, but even at our highway garage, when you go down the pecking order and you go down to even like the 10th or the 12th guy down on the list, the guy that's on a foreman level could literally be running the whole public works operations in a town like Monroe or Easton or something like that, a smaller town. So there's quite a bit of quality, up and down the line there. And I'll start talking about some of the specifics, and I'll touch on some of the stuff feedback that I've gotten from, RTM members and the constituents. One of the last and some of the unique things we do with personnel, I think it was the last RTM meeting, afterwards somebody asked me, they saw, public works workers working at a beach doing work on benches. Why were they doing it on a Sunday? Well, they were doing it on a Sunday because Public Works, we have weekend shift. We have guys that work Saturday and Sunday. They make about 10% more, but they're our lowest paid guys. When you start off, you make about $18 an hour. So even with the additional premium, we have guys working on Saturdays and Sundays at our parks, at our beaches, because there's activity there. And once again, so we're able to provide this service at straight time, basically, reduces the amount of overtime, and this is something that both Scott and Rich White implemented several years ago, and it's been successful. It involves us to, to keep the continuity going at, Friday 3:30, we're not out of the business. We still have our pulse on the town, and we're still doing stuff on the town. So that's a couple of things that we do that's a little different in service we provide. I think somebody else mentioned tonight about, about when we're stretched too thin, some of the things that happen here when you're stretched too thin. And as an anecdotal thing, my first week here in Town Hall working in September, it was at least 2 or 3 occasions, the elevator in Town Hall got stuck. People are trapped in there. Fire department has to come, relieve the person. So when it happens once, it's an accident. Happened next couple days, happened a couple days after that. And it turns out that the elevator contractor we had, who has since been replaced, was probably not up to the standards they should be. And the guy that is supposed to be overseeing them, he was doing his job, but he's overseeing roofing contractors, HVAC contractors. So that's the, and it rose to the, I guess, the catastrophic level. But that's the kind of things when your workers are stretched too thin, not able to be where they're supposed to be and pay the attention that they're supposed to be. The worker wasn't doing anything wrong. He just couldn't spend time babysitting this one contractor because he had a million other things to do. I'll talk about some of the, and I know the question will come up about cuts, and I'll talk about some of the cuts that were made previously through the rounds thus far and how it's affected us. A couple nights ago, the Board of Finance cut 2 employees from our, basically from our Public Works workers, the role of workers. We have about 75 people who work out of the Public Works garage. And one of the things, because there's such a large number of people that work down there, there's somewhat an always constant flow of workers there. So even this year in the, this fiscal year, since July 1st, we've lost through, one gentleman was dismissed, one guy went out on injury, left, 4 people took retirements. So through attrition, we've had 6 people leave, and we hired 6 more people. So what that does, and this was not atypical by any means, just because of the number of employees. So what that does is it shows vacancies. So currently we have 4 vacancies, and apparently that's what triggered the demand to have the workers cut. If you're not filling the positions, you don't need them. But large part of the gap in that was just the normal ebb and flow of personnel, and we were holding off hiring those other guys because of the pressures on our existing budget and the current status of the contract situation. So we weren't happy about that loss, but that's why that happened. and once again, that will affect us incrementally in the service we provide. We'll obviously do our best to make it not impact it, but it can't not impact us. In the first selectman, he spoke about the budget, the paving budget, the way it's historically been handled the last several years. So this year with the, as you know, the $3.5 million cut has been, $3.5 million paving budget has been reduced to $3 million. I think I have that right. And once again, based on our level of service, he talked about the number of roads. If we're able to do 5% of our roads every year with that money, we're talking somewhere around 13, 14 miles. Obviously, less money, we'll have to shave that down a little. And those are just some of the major, one other thing I wanted to speak about is the, another thing that surprised me that when I came here was the older condition of our rolling stock, our fleet. So unfortunately, that was another cut. A dump truck, which is the heart and soul of our operation. So a dump truck got cut. And that's one of the things that when you're, when you don't replace your stock, a $200,000 truck costs a lot to buy, but it costs a lot to maintain and repair. The springs on the truck are $10,000. The tires are a couple $1,000. The transmission could be $15,000. So one of the things that we face is that oftentimes we have a the lower end vehicles. We have a vehicle that that's 20 years old, and the value of the truck is probably 10 or 12,000, and we end up putting 12, 14, 15,000 in any given year into these trucks just to keep them going. So there is a point of diminishing returns that we have in the in having that older fleet. So with that, rather than get into the specifics of any of the line items, I'll defer to the RTM, and Scott knows the budget being here for many more years. Could speak to a lot of the specifics a lot better than I can.
Representative Becker? McCarthy.
So in regards to the 4 positions, last year this came up, and the discussion of being able to keep the weekend personnel on without having the overtime was a reason actually not to reduce a lot of the vacancies, if I remember. So it seems that you've now had that happen. How are you going to manage that not taking place in this particular year, having the overtime? Because I don't remember the exact details. I mean, Scott, you may remember, but it came up, and that was one of the concerns that you would have some issues with getting through
No,
that.
David, that's
and
correct.
cost us.
I'm actually proud that we've actually brought our overtime in consistent for 3 years in a row. And I think if you looked in the budget book, I don't think there's another department that can boast about that. And those are through the initiatives, again, of like creating a weekend shift. But you're correct. Certain things that, we can modify overtime in terms of scheduled events, less sweeping, less ball field maintenance, we can do that. The things we can't control is windstorms, limbs down, emergencies that arise. The benefit of the weekend crew is, yes, they're scheduled to do routine maintenance, but obviously if emergency occurs during their Saturday or Sunday shift, they're covering it at straight time in lieu of calling somebody in. But to your direct question, being short 2 more people, obviously, if we have to do the work, we either rely on contractual services or personnel to do it, and it could cost overtime.
Thank you.
Representative McCarthy?
Mr. Michelangelo, you know the question I'm going to ask you. Scott, you do too. Give me a for instance. If, as I said, the concern over tax increases has risen to the point where people are prepared to actually, or so they say, until it actually happens, prepared to accept less in the way of services. Can you give me a for instance of a service? Let's say, for the example, we identified things that your department can no longer do. Can you correlate that to a service potentially, or an example or two of what that may mean in terms of a service Public Works could not provide?
Yeah, I'll try to think of some things, but the way when we approach these things, and I'll use the example of the Board of Education, they got cut, and I've worked with many other towns, so the thing that you don't want to see your Board of Education do is cut a specific program or a sport or the band or theater, just to make the direct impact. And similarly, we try to do the same thing. So what we're trying to do when we get cut is basically hide the impact so it's not felt by our residents. But the kind of things that would be done, and I'll use the fields as an example. If we're cut in certain areas, the field may not receive the same amount of fertilizer that it did. This town's very aggressive in resodding our fields in November, this way that they could be ready for play on April 1st for the general sports and much earlier for the high school sports. That may be another consideration that's done. This town staffs our parks and our facilities all year round, basically all year round, with porta potties. And I'll use the Branford example. My daughter started playing softball. Monday night she had softball, and Wednesday night she had softball in the park in Branford. And there was every single girl who plays softball was in this park, so there was about 200 girls there. And when you drove to the park, the gates were closed. You couldn't even drive in the parking lot. You had to park down the street, walk along the street, and go in there. Well, that is the kind of thing that we don't want to do, and I don't think that'll fly in Fairfield. But that's the kind of, so our parks have been open, and people can use them, and they do use them, fully equipped with porta potties, and we're providing, garbage pickup service to those. Our beaches are not strictly, Memorial Day to Labor Day. Because people want to enjoy the beaches before and after that. So those are the kind of things that I think we do extra that we may have to cut down. Most of our street sweeping, I'll use that as an example, has to be on overtime because of the congestion in the downtown area. So that's probably another consideration. If you don't have the funding for it, you possibly try to stretch out your cycle where you're still maintaining some level of service, and hopefully to the eye it's not noticeable, but you're scaling back somewhat.
So our grass won't be as green and our streets won't be as clean.
To some degree, and the thing you're gambling is, some of our downtown areas, is not just clean.
When I say something.
Yeah, our downtown areas, the flat catch basins fill up with coffee cups and stuff like that, and they cause drainage problems. The field, not that it's not just as green, you run the risk of it, when you don't fertilize it, to turn to mud, and you lose the field, and then you're spending more money redoing the field than you saved on fertilizer. But that's some of the, the chances you take or the decisions we have to make.
All right, thanks, Joe.
Any questions? Representative Ryan.
Hi, Mr. Michelangelo. I'm trying to put together, where do you understand the budget to be for you right now, after the cuts from the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance? I mean, I'm looking at the original numbers that you projected. You were looking for a 15% increase, correct, originally?
Which was largely due to the paving being shifted from a bond into our
Correct.
budget.
But if you see the first selectmen's, the budget copy I have has just the first selectmen's request, and it was, it was down to, it was a 7.9% increase. The Board of Selectmen cut another $500,000 out of that, which put it to probably about 15.9.
They actually cut 673,000.
Correct, because some equipment was cut there also. And then last Tuesday evenings, I believe the extent of the cuts were about 950,000.
I see 424 here, from 424 from the Board of Finance. Is that correct?
Yeah, the whole deal was $1,097,673. Monday afternoon by the Board of Selectmen, $424,000 Tuesday evening by the Board of Finance. So almost $1,100,000.
Okay. So your total budget now is what?
I would in round numbers, I would say 15,300,000, 15,300,000.
Okay, so an increase of roughly, over last year, 5%, somewhere around there?
No, actually, nothing.
I'm saying.
Oh, it said, I'm sorry. You're at 15,201 was what it was approved. I had a number of 15,9, but go ahead. You're saying it's 15,3?
Yeah, yes, that's correct.
Okay. So basically, you're flat.
Correct, and when you consider that you're flat, I'm sorry. We consider when you're flat after you've just added $1 million into your budget, obviously, there's been $1 million cut to become flat again. And the million I'm referring to is from the million I'm referring to is moving the paving from bond to operational.
There was an explanation the other night at the Board of Finance meeting where you were talking about last year, there was, you were allocated $2.5 million for paving, and through this date, you've only spent $1.9 million, is that correct?
That's correct. Again, $2.5 million was in operations, and it was actually part of our plan. We would not have spent it all. Typically, we would always bring a little into the spring season. This year, it got pushed more to the spring season because when Sandy was predicted, we pulled off the roads and obviously had to deal with the aftermath of Sandy. But the reason you want to carry a little operating money into your spring is because you'll get your new budget July 1st when you can be doing road work, you know, April 30th, May 15th, June 1st, and you're actually the beneficiary of better pricing. Everybody in the region gets their money July 1. Everybody's competing for the same contractors, the same materials. Things generally escalate. We find it much better to spend money in the spring. So it's part of our strategy to have road money left over to come in to start our spring season.
Well, the reason I'm just looking at these aggregate numbers is like Tom starts with a question and says, okay, it's in your hands. Where would you cut if we had to cut you 2 or 3%? And I know it's the paving has been cut already, but not entirely. And in fact, it still stands at a $500,000 increase over last year, right? It's $3 million.
It stands at a $500,000 increase as it relates to the operational budget, but we had $1 million in a bond, and that's where the money came from. So it's the same $3.5 million. It's in theory cut because you took the bond money of $1 million, operations of 2.5, which gave us 3.5 million for our overall paving budget. Now that 3.5 is reflected in this budget, which has now been reduced to 3 million. So it is in fact a $500,000 reduction to paving. And I don't want to come across threatening, but just logically speaking, if we don't maintain our roads, our concern is, and we're doing much more with sealing pavements, chip seals, micro seals, we're investing a lot more dollars in maintenance, so we're taking roads that are good and trying to seal them before they become bad. And the reason for that is because the cost factors go up so much when you have to get into a bad road and fix it. Mm-hmm. So, again, it's not meant as threatening. Whatever money we're left with, we'll deal with, but we try to do a good strategy. You rebuild the ones that you have to rebuild because they're gone, but the ones that are worth investing dollars into maintaining and getting another 7 or 8 or 10 years out of them, that's what we're trying to shift our venue. Get more into maintenance, keep these roads good so we don't have that big ugly price tag of a rebuild.
Well, just one final comment about it. When a constituent says to me, fill the potholes, don't repave the road.
Right.
How do you respond to that when you're, look, we'd all like to have, the golden highway in front of us, but when we can't afford it,
No, I appreciate that. And again, we'll fill the pothole, but at some point, even filling the potholes, when you go to rebuild that road, it now goes from a $50,000 maintenance item to a $300,000 rebuild item. So we can patch the potholes all we want, but eventually the potholes reach a point where it's a rebuild. So I always give the analogy of a piece of wood. If you have a piece of wood that you don't care for and you don't paint, it becomes rotted. So therefore you have to replace the rotted piece of wood. We're trying that. We're saying to you that we want to paint our roads, we want to seal our roads so that we can help prevent them from rotting so we don't have to replace them. That's the best analogy I can offer.
Preventive maintenance makes sense.
Well, I'd like to believe it does, but again, I'm obviously a proponent of investing in our infrastructure, and I feel it's, money well spent. But again, I appreciate the fiscal pressure everybody feels at the same time.
Thank you.
Representative Palmer?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question on paving, but I think, okay. But just kind of more of a comment. I think the former director, Rich White and Scott, I think, over the last few years, during the budget process, me personally, I've gotten a good understanding of, what the department has been doing to, be efficient, cut costs, keep things, look for grants and all these sorts of things to kind of not only save money from your own budget, but help, even some of the other departments save money. And now, I guess the comment is, or maybe I'll start with the question, then I can comment later. How do you guys collaborate with the Board of Ed and their facilities managers? And then, we have fleets with the police department, fire department. What kind of collaboration do you do with them now? And, Mr. Michelangelo, you've been here for maybe 6 months, and your first, you cut your teeth with Sandy, so you're pretty busy in the first few months. So, but what is that collaboration like? And has a sense of urgency been increased over the past few years based on these budget pressures that we're having to figure out how to eliminate some redundancies?
Okay, to focus to the Board of Ed first. We have a strong relationship with them. They basically call on us to help them if they don't have either funding or they can't get response from a contractor to do something. That could be a water main break, a sewer break, anything of that nature. Beyond that, it's regular maintenance. For example, with the April break coming, we'll go in and sweep their parking lots. We do track our cost and annually submit them an invoice, and annually they pay it. And it varies because obviously, if we turn around and do typical maintenance without a lot of emergencies, the cost factor could be $25,000. If we did a lot of emergencies for them or small projects, we'll track those costs and it could be $40,000 or $50,000. But I think the relationship is strong. On rare occasions, but on occasions, we will call on them because we have one plumber, they do as well. If our plumber's unavailable, we may rely on them to assist us if we had a plumbing emergency. But I think that relationship is strong and it works. On the equipment side, I think it would be more driven on the fire and police side than our side. They have a sense that, and of course, given what they do, it's probably a legitimate sense, that if they ever merged with us, they can't be second to anybody or anything. And I would argue that if it's a snowstorm, my plow might take precedence over their vehicle. So I think there could be some improvement there, especially on the police end. On the fire, the struggle is we've measured up their equipment, it doesn't fit in our bays. Does that mean it can't work? I think there would just be an investment in terms of adding on a garage or enlarging a garage. But I think in all fairness, they would be more the drivers on it than we would. They would, I think, risk more than DPW would risk.
Right.
I was just going to add a couple other anecdotal things. Just by nature, because a lot of our playing fields are on their school property, we maintain a lot of those playing fields, and we do it to their standards of being a school with organic fertilizers, things like that. So it's even a higher level than we would a non-school field. And just earlier, when I first came here, we were doing a lot of the modifications in front of the school, like in Tomlinson, so the parents could drop off their kids easily. So we worked cooperatively with them. Fairfield Woods Library, if you recall, I was here for the roof project a couple months ago. Well, I tapped into Sal Morabito from the Board of Ed because they have more flat roofs than we have. So he was pretty instrumental in helping us along with that construction estimate and getting those numbers down. And we mentioned the fire department vehicles, and this happened many years ago, but one of the things we did is we have the current set of portable lifts that we have at our town garage. Well, I was asked this question, about combining services. Well, it turns out that we used to have 2 sets of those, and they were somewhat redundant in Public Works. So that was something that was shared with the fire department. So their lifts that are now getting old, just like ours, originally were Public Works vehicle lifts. So there has been a cooperation over the years between the departments.
Okay, great. And again, it's just more of a comment, but in light of these budget pressures, and I just would suggest, it's not to say that there isn't one, but just a sense of urgency on figuring out, really how to get creative about collaborating and figuring, ways to cut costs, because then it allows us to do some of these things and, kind of maintain the levels of the capital outlay and, but thanks, guys.
Just for the record, we never got paid back for the 4 jacks that we gave the fire department.
I had Representative Becker and then Representative
Should be a quick one,
Meyer.
but I know it happens more on the post road, which is state. One of the things on that level that drove me up the wall was when they paved the post road a couple of years ago. Then they came through with a project and ripped it all up, and then we paved all the post road again, which costs us a lot of money somewhere. But what I've noticed is the utility companies, especially in the winter, it gets bad, but primarily state road, but also throughout town, they come in and all of a sudden, all the way down a road, they dig up and they repave it, but then, it's sunk down a couple of inches and it's not the same. Is there somewhere within your department that you guys try to stay on them to say, hey, look, you didn't do a good job, get back over, redo it, something like that, or maybe even, try to, I know you don't have a ton of staff to babysit them all the time, but that costs us money down the road when we have to go back and we have to do it, or a road, we get into the pothole conversation that Mr. Ryan brought up. I mean, that's even worse in some ways, and it can be very costly.
To answer your question, yes. Number one, we're frustrated by the amount of excavating by utilities, especially after we pave a new road. But the Department of Public Utilities is very clear in their language, which we aren't in a position to prevent, like a gas company, from creating new revenue. So if a resident wants to switch from oil to gas and we pave the road, they can do it. But to further answer your question, we control the permit process because they are in our road. So if they do a bad job, we have the right to hold their next permit and force them to go back and redo the first job. The issue we find with the utility company is there's a timeline. We don't want to rush it too much because we think they do, in some cases, suspect enough work that if they do the permanent repair too soon, we're fighting with them because they say we did a temporary repair, we did a permanent repair, and now you want us to do a second permanent repair. Our message to them is do it right the first time, and you won't have to do it 3 times. So it happens. We fight it out. We had a meeting 2 weeks ago with the gas company. We saw what the town looked like after the winter. Most were their utilities. To their credit, there's contractors in now. They're clearing up all their trenches because basically we revoked their permit for the end of the winter. So we are on it. I don't think it's as good as, we'd all like to see it. It's better than it has been.
And the gas company is the big push with the price of gas, probably 50% of what it costs for oil. They're expanding more than they've ever expanded ever, especially in Fairfield. So last year, they probably had a record year in the number of pipe they installed and the number of services, and that most likely will continue in 2013. So you'll see more activity, and we'll keep on them to repair them. But it's a fact of the economics of the heating fuel.
Representative Meyer first.
Good evening. I observe whenever I see work being done, whether it's pipes, whether it's manholes, whether it's cleaning out, the water in the drains, you will see the DPW working, and then you'll see 1, if not 2, police officers. they get, what, $57, $60 an hour. Is there a reason that we need to use these people? I would think that there would be people that we could hire part-time, because I was looking at your overtime budget, and then I'm looking at the police, and it's huge. Could there be a cost saving there that we don't have to use police officers? Or is there a mandate? We could use crosswalkers who have the ability to deal with traffic, who have the ability to stop a car. I would think that that would be a huge saving for the town, because the overtime is crazy.
It's a good question, and it's my understanding that the Police Commission governs public safety, and it's their recommendation to use police officers for road work. I would say to you that $57 an hour is the going rate for police, but we have had successful bids on the street in the $28 range for the same service, as well as we mandate our entire highway division to be flagger certified annually. But that decision would not rest solely on my shoulders, but yes, there could be a cost savings there.
And how do we go about renegotiating that?
Again, I'm not certain if it would be my position to renegotiate it, but I would think the town could take a hard look and discuss with the police commission if the town of Fairfield itself, through its workforce and its projects, could be exempt from their ruling. And if that could be the case, we could have some savings there, yes.
Yeah, well, what, other towns use that system, so I hope that maybe, Mr. Tetro, that we could maybe look into that and maybe find some savings for the town.
Representative Carey, then Connolly.
Oops, sorry.
My question, the other night you had mentioned that you have the parks mowed for $125,000, and I was just curious, schools are maintained at the board, on the Board of Ed side. For the parks, how many parks are included in that, and is it including, what is constituted as a park? Is it also open space areas, or what is included for them, the mowing?
The mowing that is covered on the $125,000 amounts to all the public land that's not maintained by the Board of Ed or Conservation. Conservation piggybacks on our bid, but they have a different threshold. With their open spaces, they might not cut weekly. They may want the birds nesting and the wildlife, so they may cut more like monthly in their bid. But and it gets a little muddy, but I'll do my best to explain it. Sturgis Park, for example, when they switched back to 2 high schools, became the Board of Ed, so Fairfield DPW has no maintenance there. However, we do in fact maintain Mill Plain Green across from Carlton, and we maintain a traffic island down the street, and so on. So when we came up with our bids, we basically just took a geographical approach. Whether it was small or big grass, we just said a crew's going to start at this job, drive by this job, and go to this job, and we parceled them that way, and we've driven the cost down. And if we're being totally realistic, the labor rate they're paying is substantially less than ours, so we got out of the grass business. I mean, I can just recite locations, but basically, every facility, like Fairfield Woods, they do the school, we do the soccer field. What we've tried to do is put both out to contract. If we're satisfied with their number, then we award the contractor. In most cases, we've been able to make that marriage because they're happy with the contractor. But there's a few exceptions out there. I don't know if I'm really answering your question.
No,
but
I'm just trying to get a balance between the $170,000 on the Board of Ed side,
Right.
which, and the 125
Yeah.
that you have. Do you know how many acres ballpark?
No, but I can get it for you, not too hard.
No,
Well, but I could get it for you.
Yeah, you don't need to,
Yeah.
like, I'm just trying to find the balance.
I know we did a comparison once, and it was such a low price. We even questioned how the contractors do it for that price, but in all honesty, we don't care how they do it. We're happy that
able to do it.
Yeah, exactly. We're thrilled that the grass is getting cut, especially at that low, price value. But we narrowed it down, and it came in at like $50 an acre or even less. I mean, it was an incredible value, for the town.
Okay, and then does it include leaf cleanup at the end of the year?
No, we box out in the bid two components, and again, if you heard me the other night, I probably, Rich White and myself didn't take enough credit when it came to this stuff, but we constantly try the market. So when we even put out grass, what we do is we put in a spring cleanup fee and a fall cleanup fee. And then this allows us to either evaluate, A, where are we with our manpower? Can we get to it? Do we want to get to it? Boy, did the price come in so good, why mess with it for $200? And that's what we'll do. We'll literally get rid of some parks and say, hey, you know what, for $400, we spent 3 days there last year, let them do it for $400. So we do that, but it's not a specific guarantee. It's considered an option in the bid, and we award it as we select eligible.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Representative Conley?
Thank you. I just wanted to thank both of you for your service and dedication to the community. I personally witnessed all the activity that went on during the storms, and I have to say that our DPW was exemplary. Out there every minute. I don't know if anybody saw snow plowing in one of the worst snowstorms in history, and maybe the whole country. These guys are out 36 hours doing a job that nobody wants to do. They're out on Sunday mornings picking up garbage. I really need to let everybody know that I personally thank all of you. Just a follow-up question on the police. Does that come out of that road service that you pay $57? Does that come out of your outside service budget, out of the DPW?
Tom, to be honest with you, because the way the items are structured in terms of us hiring the police, it comes out of, some of it out of the paving bond, some of it out of contractual services, because depending on the activity we're doing, that activity will come out of those accounts. So it's not a specific line item, it's spread in multiple areas.
But it is coming out of your budget.
That is correct. It comes out of the Department of Public Works
Great.
Operations.
I needed to clarify that. Second question, if I can. It seems like DPW provides many in-kind services to other departments. They seem to get the credit and you get the debit, being that it's your budget doing in-kind to everybody else. And again, these are things that I witness and hear, whether it's and I don't want to specifically say any department, but it seems like a lot of this goes as credit and debits. And it seems like more and more becomes debit to your department. We saw a lot of that when we were building Penfield. Tremendous amount of time came out of DPW when they could have been doing other things. I think a lot of people are debiting your department when they shouldn't be. So I was just wondering if there's a measure of credits and debits we could give so that we actually know that your department is giving to somebody else and they're actually getting credit for that. I'm kind of asking the question, but I'd sure like to show to RTM and the people of this community that, in fact, those people are getting the credits at your expense. So I'm not sure if that's a doable thing, but I'd really like the public to know those things.
Well, the answer to your question is yes, it's doable, because we track all our labor costs in terms of what jobs they're on, what equipment they used, how long it took. So the answer is yes. We don't typically debit everything. We've always had that relationship with the Board of Ed. For example, they just called me today. They're working on a report, and they wanted to know how much they owed me for winter salt. So we document what they take storm by storm and give them an invoice at the end of the winter season. I guess it could be done, to answer your question, yes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? I just have one. Sure. It's about paving. And for many years, we've talked about where are we with paving? Are we on track? Are we caught up? Could you give us an idea of where we stand?
We're not quite as caught up as we'd like to be, but we're in a much better position thanks to the board's approval the last 3 years. That $3.5 million for the last 3 years has done a tremendous job in helping us get where we need to be. If we keep at that pace a few more years, we'd be delighted to come in and tell you, we've reached a point we can start, reduction, but I don't think we're there yet. As I said to the Board of Finance the other night, there was some question about should they cut additional paving, and again, you boards have to do what you have to do, but I could sit here and tell you that we have this annual allotment for 3.5, which will now, by this cut, become 3, and we have the next 2 years at 3.5 already booked. Many residents call and say, where am I? And I hate to even tell them, because as the money gets cut, you don't know if they end up 2 or 3 or 4 years out. And the other thing is, keep in mind, that's at today's prices. I don't control escalation. So even with $3 million and 3.5 in the next 2 years, depending where our price values go, I will say that, and this is the way the bids work, this particular year, we're working off the state of Connecticut, what they call VIP, vendor in place pricing. And it's at an all-time low for us. And how that's driven is the local contractors are bidding on state work, and this year the state happens to be doing 3 main arteries in Fairfield. Hence, to get that work, those contractors bid lower. We become the beneficiary because we're in Fairfield, and they won the Fairfield bid for state roads. So again, cut or do whatever we have to do, but we might regret that we're cutting at a lower cost value this year, where next year, if the cost, because there's not state paving, that same ton could be up 5 or 10%, that may be the year we don't want to do as much because it costs more.
Thank you, Scott. I just wanted to clarify that, because being on the body, moving this into a maintenance structure, I thought was very beneficial to us as a community. But I also have heard your explanation about the purchasing and the pricing in April versus July. So thank you for that as well. A reminder. Representative Meyer.
I have a quick question. You said, and I just want to make sure I'm clear here, that some of the monies that you pay for overtime for the police comes out of your paving budget.
That's correct.
How much?
Well, I don't have an exact number until I know the roads that we're doing, but what I use as a rough benchmark is if you're paving a road and you're mandated to hire 2 officers, one being on each end of the street, and the cost is $57 an hour, it becomes $114 an hour times the 8 hours, basically becomes $1,000 a day. So I then have to look at what we think our production on that given main road will be, how many days will be there, for example, milling, how many days will be there paving, then I take that total amount of days times the 1,000, and that is how much. But now with the, budget in flux, I'm not sure. I might regret saying this, but if I'm being totally honest, to date, we've spent $120,000 in this current budget on police. We have $7,000 outstanding in invoices, and we project another 20 to 25 by July 1st.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Representative Carey. Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Sudman, would you like, why don't you come up and join us?
Come up over here.
I saved a spot for you.
Do you have an outline of the vendors that you use for the contracted property services?
I can create one. Basically, again, some are very easy. We just put out porta potties, we get the lowest price vendor, and we assign them up for that year to do it. Others are a little more complex, because to get the best pricing, we might have 3 mowing contractors, not just one. But I can get you all the vendors and specifically what they do and what their cost factors are.
It had come up as part of Public Works, and might be beneficial to see.
Yeah, the other thing, if I may go back to Tom's point, and I might not have articulated it well, I probably didn't, and he's right, sometimes DPW gets thrown in a role last minute, but we kind of feel empowered, not so much like, hey, look what we could do, but good that if a contractor comes in on Penfield 1, and there's 3 segments to his bid, and segment number 2, he's just out of his mind, and it's not worth it to us, it is refreshing to know we can insert our crew and not pay that higher hostage rate. And the other thing that we probably, again, don't take enough credit for, even when we get these bad storms, we obviously have a certain depth of contractors, but some of these storms have cut even deeper into those contractors. But we do a darn good job. We call extra contractors, and they want to put it to you if they could. And we basically say, no, this is our bid structure, this is what you're working at. And they go, nope, I'm going to go somewhere else. Well, guess what? 2 minutes later, they're in our town doing our work for our price. We don't get gouged. We know what the value of these things are. We know what we're paying other people. We do that twofold. We do it to protect us as citizens in this town, and we also feel an allegiance to the contractors that sharpen their pencil to give us good numbers to do good work. I don't think they'd be doing good work if we hosed them.
It's worked wonderfully. I'm just, and across the boards, it has, just for transparency.
Yeah.
I think it would just be a good thing to have out there.
I can get it for you.
Yeah, but and you have done, and I think it's wonderful that you are able to recognize the abilities and strengths of your team and outsource, or when you can find ways of doing it less expensively, and that's fabulous. So,
thank you.
Representative Sundman.
I just have a Public Works announcement if everyone is finished with comments, or if this is the last. Are there any more comments?
One.
Yeah.
Representative Palmer, he wants
Yeah,
to end the evening.
And I hate to belabor the paving thing, but one thing that just I've noticed personally, let's say versus 2 years ago, most of the main roads, and I'll give like Mill Plain, Brookside, that Burr, a lot of the main roads have been addressed, and so you're no longer hitting potholes that are there just from wear. And again, that's just an observation. I might get people saying, no, my road's terrible, but and I think David made a great point about some of the contract or the utility companies coming in and making a mess, and that's where a lot of the potholes are generated from. But my street, which is a side street, doesn't get a lot of traffic, had maybe some cracks going through, and I know it has to be maintained, it's a town asset, whatever, but it was paved with the micro seal, and it just seemed like an extravagance, actually, so I guess, I know we've got this overall strategy for, dealing with all the mileage of roads that we have, but I think there's a priority that's actually been addressed in the last 2 years, and that, again, that's just my observation from driving around.
Fair point. And please don't take this as me being a wise guy. Number one, be happy to hook up with you for an hour anytime you want to buzz around. I'll show you what's on our radar. But number two, what comes to the top of my mind, Pequot Avenue, High Street, Holland Hill Road, those are mains that need servicing. Holland Hill Road, especially as you get out to North Benson Road. Also, and this is what I love to give as my example, I encourage everybody to go to Park Avenue and start at Jefferson Street and head south towards Long Island Sound and look at that micro seal on the Fairfield side and look at the Bridgeport side. And I'm not picking on Bridgeport, but I would ask you to look at the deterioration in their pavement and look at the quality in Fairfield, and then understand this one thing. Both pavements are the same age. If that's not proof in the pudding that maintenance dollars work, because they're riddled with delaminations, which are the overlays peeling off the subbase of the road, potholes, cracks. In fact, people tell me that when they drive on their side of Park Avenue, they drive in the shoulder, so they're missing the potholes in their section. But again, we can cut whatever we have to cut, but we believe firmly that our maintenance strategy, like a Park Avenue, when you see the Bridgeport side, and if I didn't know they were paved the same time, I couldn't give you that fair example. How I know that is Fairfield split the cost and paved that road with Bridgeport. Now what we did is we micro-sealed our side, and I urge you to look at the difference. Another follow-up is roads that have been crack sealed. Crack seal is a great tool. It lasts 2 or 3 years. Then you either have to put another crack seal on or another seal. And the roads that come to mind are like Katona Drive, Judd Street, Stilson Road. We don't have to catch them. We can stop it if we want. It's my belief that we'll catch those, and you'll stop the lamination process, potholes from developing, and we'll be ahead of the game.
Yeah, sure. And I'm assuming all these main roads, because most of the roads you mentioned are heavily trafficked, and I'm not saying that I've traveled but some of the ones you mentioned, I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. But I'm assuming they're on the schedule, you know, for the annual. But again, it's just more, I guess, is the priority, you know, are you looking at those main roads as priority, and then, you know, everyone's side street as, you know, once we've caught up, we can start addressing these things. And that's really where I was going. And
The original paving plan in the early 90s identified solely main roads. Then, when we hit the 2000s, we realized that we weren't doing anything on our side roads. So the indirect answer to your question is it's really a balancing act with both. It's great to say you have the best main roads, but if you let all your side roads deteriorate, you're going to have the same cost factor because it's going to cost the same. Obviously, the materials and everything, they don't know if it's a main road or a side road. Plus, a big part of this program, residents will call in and say, my road's deteriorating, my curb's shot, what are you going to do? We'll now go in and we'll excavate all the old concrete curb, which if you excavate, form, and pour that same concrete curb, it's $22 a linear foot. By putting a new road in, you're getting extruded concrete curb for $6.50 a foot. So we believe it is an enhancement for that neighborhood. It's very hard to tell residents, we know you're paying taxes, we know your curb looks hideous, your curb appeal looks lousy, but we're not going to do your road. It's, you know, and again, we'll have to say that if it comes to it, but right now we think we do a good balancing act of main roads, side roads, getting in and improving curbing and drainage, all under the paving umbrella.
yeah, thank you. And again, it's just knowing that you guys are doing the balancing act. That's.
Thank you. You can close it out.
Yeah, and just following up on Joe's, maybe you could send out, I think when we did the bonding appropriation a couple of years ago with all the presentation documents and whatnot, there were some lists of kind of the current, and obviously it was going to fluctuate based upon some things. Maybe, I'm sure you have an updated one to send to the body. I'm sure that would be very helpful for everybody.
I was ready to send, and when the budget got cut, I didn't want to put out streets that we weren't going to get to, so I have to modify, and now I'll send it out.
No, it was helpful.
And maybe
and-
you should wait until May 10th.
Yeah.
I'll wait till May 10th.
And it had, I think, each type of service that you were general, it would just give you an idea, so that'd be helpful.
I do have it with me, I just haven't publicized it, because I don't want to be I'm putting you in an embarrassing position. If I put it out, and then you guys cut, and then I have to cut the streets off, they're going to know why the streets got cut.
And we very much appreciate that.
I want to thank you both very much for your time this evening and all the attention you've given to us. I do know that we have an announcement that needs to be made.
Thank you. I just wanted to invite everyone to a very exclusive dump tour.
Exclusive.
That's going to happen on April 20th, sponsored by the RTM Public Works and Planning Committee and the Department of Public Works. We're going to have two tours, one at 9 a.m. and one at 10:30 a.m. We're going to start at the Water Pollution Control Facility on One Around Highway, and we're going to tour the transfer station, the town garage, Green Cycle. We're going to review equipment in detail. We're going to also have Touch a Truck and things like that for kids. It's for RTM members and Town Fairfield residents. April 20th at 9 a.m. and there'll be a 10:30. Thank you.
Can I ask that you email that to Mr. Steele so he can email it out to every member?
Okay, sure thing. It'll also be on the town website by tomorrow morning. We haven't asked permission yet, but I think it'll happen.
Mr. Leslie's not here anymore.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was going to say, if anybody really wants to have a thrill, you should spend an hour at the Public Works answering the phone, because then you would understand what these folks actually have to deal with. It is not pleasant.
Thank you again very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.
If they see my number, they don't...